The heroine realized she couldn't breathe when suddenly a pair of rough hands grabbed her clothes and yanked her upwards. Then, the man punched her in the face, roaring that her recklessness had ruined the family's fortune. The man was furious that she had tried to commit suicide the day before her wedding. When a man called her Hailey, the heroine stared at him in confusion, but she had no idea who Hailey was, because her name was Connie Che. Her grandmother, fed up with her granddaughter's strangeness, snapped, "Why are you being like this again? There's no one here." The child always saw things, and the adults began to think she was possessed. There was a medium in Chunam, so the woman suggested sending the girl there, certain he could solve the problem. No one could figure out why God had saved her. She was thin and useless. Abandoned by her parents at birth, Ike saw things a child shouldn't see. Grandma Young's son took her in, but the girl survived by doing odd jobs. But now, the girl had never seen this place, nor did she know the man who was screaming at her. But Yi-jae realized she was trapped in Hailey's body, and the heroine couldn't feel the original owner's presence at all. Suddenly, all sounds vanished, and she froze on the spot. Hailey's memories began to flash around her, scene after scene, all taking place underwater. Somehow, the heroine finally understood that Hailey had thrown herself into the water on purpose. Yi-jae wasn't just possessed. She had taken over the body of a dead girl. Meanwhile, the man started shouting even louder that the little brat wasn't listening to him at all. In the memory Yi-jae saw, that was Hailey's father, Duke Duncan. He was furious. His ignorant daughter had no idea how much he had sacrificed for this marriage. A man's voice cut through the chaos, laughing as he called it a rare spectacle. Duke Duncan froze, then shoved his daughter hard, making her fall to the side. Now he fully understood how the ducal family handled discipline. He told Duke Duncan to get lost. His precious fiancée needed him. When the father didn't move, the man stepped forward, his voice icy. "Get lost." This man appeared in Hailey's memories. He was her groom, the ruling monarch of this country. But the girl who was now Hailey had never seen so many resentful spirits, and her body trembled violently because of them. She didn't understand what the man had done to be surrounded by them like that. The man tilted his head slightly and asked why she was trembling so much. Seeing the terrifying ghosts lingering around him, Hailey obviously couldn't remain calm. Meanwhile, the man sighed and told his fiancée not to tremble before him, as he wasn't going to kill her. The heroine remembered that Hailey had caused a huge scandal by committing suicide the day before her wedding. She told her fiancé that his words made her tremble even more. These words made the male lead laugh. He lifted her chin, explaining that he had just come to talk, as they had only exchanged a few words before. But the male lead didn't understand why she would give her life for it if she truly didn't want this marriage. She didn't know the answer, as Hailey's memories were still incomplete. The heroine didn't want to die, so she answered with doubt, although it wasn't that she hated the marriage either. She froze when her fiancé asked if she still couldn't forget another man. There had never been such a person in Kwon Yuji's life, but there had been in Hailey's. But now, his fiancé's heart belonged to some man he didn't care about. He wanted to support her true love. But this man didn't want to go down in history as a sad king. His words made the heroine look surprised and confused. Meanwhile, the male lead firmly lifted Hailey's chin and told her she must live. But if she was bent on dying, she should wear the crown first. The heroine realized that no matter where she went, she was the unfortunate one. This girl, who could see ghosts, had been taken in by Grandma Young-san. As a famous prophet, the grandmother was careful with visitors to prevent ghosts from causing harm, and she didn't mince her words. She told her granddaughter to take every opportunity to avoid water. The heroine had spent her whole life trying to ignore ghosts until she woke up in Hailey's body. Then she met a man who dragged a large crowd of ghosts with him. Now, he was going to give her the crown, even though in her past life, Ike was just a mountain worker. The ghosts were watching her, which meant they were waiting for her answer. Don't make eye contact with them. Hailey decided to gather her courage and ask just one thing. What would happen if she refused his offer? The king replied thoughtfully that the wedding had been postponed because the bride had caught a bad cold. If Hailey backed out now, the reason wouldn't be a cold, but a fatal illness. then I will have to die. The male lead found her reaction a little amusing. Now Hailey had to answer whether she would jump into the water again or make a wise choice this time. Hailey shook her head. No, she wasn't going to give up her life, at least not until the groom said, "Until you wear that crown." That was a promise she could make. The male lead considered it for a moment, but decided to trust her for the time being. His expression, however, said otherwise. No one could blame him. Who would believe someone who almost died yesterday due to her own foolish act? The king grinned and said he could overlook his bride's mistake this time. Then he snapped his fingers, and Duke Duncan was brought in immediately. Shortly after, Hailey's father was back in the room. Damn it, he was furious that in his own mansion, he had to obey someone else's orders. The young man slammed his scabbard on the floor and told the Duke this was his only warning. His daughter was about to become the Queen of Kian, which was exactly what the Duke wanted, meaning he could no longer touch her as he pleased. But if the Duke ever thought of laying a finger on her again, he'd better remember whose face to check first. Hailey froze, terrified by the violent aura emanating from her fiancé. The heroine knew he wasn't joking. He really might kill the Duke. The black-haired man cursed under his breath, feeling that familiar urge. But he quickly controlled himself and demanded a response from the Duke. The head of the Duncan family reluctantly nodded to His Majesty. Hailey couldn't believe what she was seeing. If her fiancé were an ordinary man, he would have lost control by now. But he was holding on purely by willpower. When the black-haired man extended his hand to her, the girl froze. Only then did she realize she was still kneeling. So she placed her hand in His Majesty's, accepting his offer. But the male lead did nothing else, letting Hailey get up on her own, leaving her confused by her fiancé's actions. Suddenly, he grabbed her hand and kissed it, asking if 4 days would be enough to get over this cold. The scandal was already raging, and they couldn't wait any longer. After getting the girl's consent, His Majesty dropped a bombshell. This was his final act of mercy towards the Duncan family. He pulled her closer and pleaded, "Hailey Duncan, you'd better get there alive. I'll be waiting for you." Now the male lead had to return to the castle. From now on, some royal knights would be on duty to protect Hailey's safety until the wedding. They were also watching the Duke. There was no way he could touch the future queen. Roderick Peruse Blake ruled the kingdom of Kian. Burdened with all the karma and suffering, he had somehow survived. So our heroine couldn't help but wonder, what was her true identity? 4 days flew by, and the grand wedding day arrived. Many people felt that something would go wrong. The past brides had been nothing but trouble. They said Duke Duncan was an absolute monster. Hailey's mind was filled with these rumors. The memories were incomplete, with many gaps, but one thing was certain. The king had already tried to marry twice. He had one condition. They had to come from weak, noble families that did not covet power. The first bride died in an accident, the second was poisoned, and the third narrowly escaped. But the heroine knew the third attempt had also failed because the real Hailey had drowned in the river. Roderick entered the room and asked the bride if she had sweet dreams, as this was her last night at home. Not that the house was worth missing, though. Hailey hesitated for a moment, then said she had slept well. Surprisingly, there was nothing clinging to her groom today. But the heroine clearly remembered him being surrounded by a swarm of angry ghosts back then, so she didn't understand. If you squinted, Roderick's face was actually kind of cute. Hailey even felt a little jealous. To be honest, the king noticed his bride's intense stare and his brow furrowed immediately. He asked complainingly what she was doing. The heroine realized she had been staring for too long and quickly looked away. She apologized to her groom, saying she was just really nervous. Roderick let out a weary breath and coldly announced that he hated being deceived. The king was certain the lady wasn't nervous at all. The heroine covered her mouth, realizing she had messed up again. Roderick found her reaction amusing. She decided to be honest, admitting she was just trying to be careful in front of someone of high status. If she didn't hold back, she might make a mistake. Hailey started to panic. She had been too honest. But the king told her to just be herself. Now he understood what she meant. A servant knocked, entered with a deep bow, and announced it was time to depart. Roderick turned to the lady and told her it was time to go. Hailey took His Majesty's arm and walked with the king towards the ceremony hall. Old habits die hard. She had never worn heels or cumbersome clothes, yet she walked so naturally. Suddenly, she felt a breeze, and fear froze Hailey's body as a terrifying thought struck her. Sensing a different presence, the heroine looked up. A ghost sat on a noble white horse, right above the priest's head. His face remained serious and expressionless. It was the first time Hailey had sensed that powerful ghost. Now she was filled with confusion and complex emotions. He didn't look like a ghost or an evil spirit, but he was still high level. The creature's gaze suddenly shifted to Hailey. The girl quickly looked away, knowing that if she crossed paths with him, trouble would follow. Roderick suddenly asked, "Hailey Duncan, what in the world was that?" The heroine apologized and held her fiancé's arm tighter. This world was both strange and dangerous, and hostile ghosts could be roaming these halls, so Hailey needed to stay alert. At midnight, the first squad commander, Yi-jae, suggested His Majesty consider their proposal. Roderick scoffed, "Even if you were a Duncan, this won't be easy, Yi-jae." The first squad commander was spouting some damn nonsense. Despite what Roderick had heard, she didn't seem that naive. Yi-jae decided to ask if it was really that guy's doing. There was definitely something suspicious about the deaths of the king's two brides. So the captain of the first squad guessed that Hailey's father, Duncan, had deliberately eliminated all competitors. When Jade asked if the king blamed Duke Duncan for this, Roderick's eyes turned cold and calculating. If the king's first two brides hadn't been murdered, he wouldn't have had to marry into a powerful family like the Duncans. Duke Duncan had openly lobbied for a royal marriage. It was highly likely he was the one who did it. But his own daughter had tried to commit suicide. She wasn't being pursued, nor did she ever want to be queen. But that didn't clear her father of suspicion. For now, continue to monitor the Duncan family and find a way to use Hailey to our advantage. Jade looked confused and asked His Majesty, "Shouldn't you have left by now?" It seemed the first squad captain thought the king might abandon his bride on their wedding night. But the king ordered another drink. Jade pleaded with him to be gentle. His wife was still a young girl, trapped in a game of chess. Roderick didn't answer. He just ordered men to be posted in the queen's chambers to watch her. Jade accepted the order and told His Majesty not to worry. Roderick downed his drink and then slammed the cup on the table with a loud bang. Then the man stood up and walked towards the door. The king seemed to be in a good condition today. The first squad commander guessed that the king's madness might have subsided. The king had been suffering from nervous breakdowns and severe insomnia. As the symptoms worsened, rumors began to spread. So Jade silently prayed for his ruler to be all right. Roderick walked confidently towards the room he needed, but the dark ghosts caught up with him. Then the king started hearing the creature's insane laughter again, endlessly. He was even wondering why he had been feeling so good. But now his head felt like it was about to explode. The heroine glanced at herself in the mirror, wondering if her nightgown was too thin. Tonight was supposed to be their first wedding night. In all of Kan Yu-jin's life, nothing like this had ever happened, as she had always hidden in her village. It wasn't that she didn't want it. On the contrary, this could be considered a great opportunity. The ghosts of virgins and bachelors were especially offended. The heroine didn't understand why it was such a big deal to them. So Hailey decided she had to find out for herself. But all her excitement vanished when she saw her husband standing at the door of the room with his arms crossed. Roderick was holding his head, which was still ringing like a damn bell. Hailey didn't understand why so many evil spirits were swarming him, as if he had just rolled through a battlefield or a cemetery. The king had just dropped a bombshell. She was the queen now. The Duke was a complete tyrant to his child. Roderick sat on the edge of the bed, while Hailey's brain short-circuited. What on earth was she supposed to do? She awkwardly sat down beside him. Hailey gathered her courage and asked, "Your Majesty, are you with me?" He couldn't let the screams of those evil spirits in his ears break him. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him frantically. "Snap out of it." Roderick looked up, blinking as if he had just woken up. He was out of his mind. So Hailey started shaking the man even harder while screaming at the top of her lungs that he was not the man he claimed to be. Roderick winced in pain, which meant the heroine's words were finally getting through to him. But the man lost consciousness and collapsed onto Hailey's lap. But she could feel that he was much better now. The man had a solid build, a straight nose, a strong jaw, and a perfectly shaped head. On top of that, even when Roderick was weak, his energy was impressive. Negative ghosts shouldn't be clinging to someone like him. So why were they after him? Grandma Hailey's words flashed through her mind. If she started seeing ghosts, they would start seeing her too. If she interfered with the affairs of the other world, it would interfere with her life as well. So she shouldn't do it. But this man had saved the heroine from Duke Duncan, who was beating her. All Hailey could do was see ghosts, and she had learned a few small tricks from her grandmother. If she got involved with ghosts, she would only get hurt. But as a thank you, the heroine could help him at least once. At least this man could get a peaceful night's sleep today. The evil spirits immediately realized that the girl could see them. The heroine tore a piece of cloth from her nightgown, which was exactly what was needed for the ritual. She wasn't sure if it would work, but she bit her thumb until it bled anyway. Fighting ghosts came down to a battle of strength. So, she drew a blood talisman on the torn piece of cloth. Then she told the dead to leave, for the worlds of the living and the dead should not intersect. The evil forces needed to return to where they belonged. After that, the ghosts began to retreat. Hailey gasped for air, thinking she had succeeded. But in an instant, she felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat and a dizzy spell. Hailey hadn't completely purified the space. She had only temporarily scared off the dead. But they would be back. She decided to hide the talisman under the bed. At least the king could get some peace tonight. Hailey had repaid his kindness. The young woman suddenly felt weak all over, so she snuggled up to the man and fell asleep. The next morning came. The heroine slowly opened her eyes and immediately saw a man right in front of her. She jumped when the king casually asked if she was awake in that suspiciously calm tone. Hailey immediately recoiled. The girl, confused, asked the man why he was staring at her with such a strange look. He pointed to her torn nightgown. Hailey's face immediately turned red, while Roderick asked if he had done it, as he didn't remember having any passionate night with her. The girl immediately started waving her arms, trying to explain that absolutely nothing had happened between them. Of course, it wasn't that she was sad that nothing had happened between them. Roderick threw a blanket over and told the heroine to cover herself. If it wasn't him, the man wondered if there had been someone else in the room. Hailey didn't know how to explain, so she replied that she did it herself. Roderick didn't understand why, so the girl explained that she felt very hot and heavy in her sleep. The king pretended he hadn't heard anything. Then he stood up to leave, allowing the girl to rest a little longer. The door slammed shut, and Hailey's face turned even redder as the king acted as if he hadn't heard a thing. So it wasn't him, Roderick thought to himself. His memories of last night were all fragmented. He had thought he was going crazy, but now his head was clear. This had happened twice since Hailey Duncan appeared in this castle, but the girl always made strange excuses. For days had passed since then. After that terrible first night, Hailey hadn't seen the king again. She wasn't going to thank him, but strangely, she felt a little lost. But there was no time to think about that now. The heroine decided to try making a proper talisman, but she didn't have the right materials. Ever since that night, the evil spirits had been giving her the creeps. They kept whispering that Roderick would cut off her head and that she would die screaming. But she had already died once, and doing it again would be too cruel. She had to set up a barrier, which meant hiding a bunch of talismans behind picture frames and under furniture. Hailey began to regret that she hadn't listened to her grandmother and helped the king. Suddenly, Hailey heard a faint sob. It didn't feel like an evil spirit. It had a completely different energy. Hailey walked over to the curtain and yanked it open. She immediately froze, looking down in shock. A small, glowing ghost sat on the floor, tears streaming from its eyes. Hailey hesitated for a moment, then asked, "What are you doing here? Why don't you go home?" But the child said, "This is my home." Hailey realized it wasn't evil, that I won't hurt you. She promised. I was really scared. The child confessed. Actually, Hailey started to panic. Maybe her talismans had scared the child. Then Hailey glanced at the cracked jewelry box. The thing looked over 100 years old. Old things often carry someone's memories, so this was the spirit of the box. Perhaps because the box was broken, he couldn't hide or fully use his powers. Hailey apologized to the child, as she couldn't fix it. Her clumsy hands were not up to the task, but she promised to keep the creepy ghosts out of this room. It was the only thing she could do, so the little ghost wouldn't have to be scared anymore. The child agreed and insisted that she leave what she was holding right there in his house. He circled her like a child who had been given candy, repeating his request over and over. The cunning little ghost had probably been alive for 300 years, not 100. Hailey did as he said, and suddenly, a goofy grin appeared on the little ghost's face. I couldn't help but smile back. I suppose this was the first time I had truly felt happy since I got trapped here. Another 4 days passed, and Hailey fell ill from overworking herself making those talismans. She had pushed herself beyond her limits. There was still much to do to stabilize this place. I carved a tree and made a bracelet, but that was just the beginning. A whole pillar needed to be carved and erected in the room to enhance the protection. Roddy leaned over and asked, "What are you busy with?" The heroine was so startled, she dropped the talisman. The handmaiden had told the king his wife was unwell, so Roderick had brought some medicine to visit her. Then the man pointed to Deborah, who was standing behind him. The heroine hadn't expected this and awkwardly thanked him for his concern. She glanced at the door and realized the evil spirits couldn't enter. The barrier was working. But she couldn't stop the most powerful ones, so they needed to set up that pillar as soon as possible. Roderick decided to see what his wife was fiddling with, only to find it was just a thick, cylindrical wooden stick. The king and the handmaiden froze instantly. Deborah had guessed that the newlyweds might not have done anything on their wedding night, but she never thought it would be this bad. To Hailey's shock, the king snatched her amulet and the knife from her hand. The queen, who had just jumped into the water, was carrying a knife, which meant Roderick wouldn't let it slide, so that was confiscated too. The heroine couldn't believe it. She needed to build the exorcism pillar. Roderick walked towards the exit, reminding the girl one last time to take the medicine he had brought. He had come to check the report from the captain of the knights, because it looked suspicious. He had noticed the smell of smoke in the queen's room, and a soldier had also found some ashes. She had gotten a butcher's knife from somewhere and was carving something every day, which gave Roderick no peace. He had no idea what the hell that thing was. The heroine collapsed onto the bed. She was exhausted and distraught. She could have finished the pillar in a few days, but now it was all for nothing. At this moment, an idle Hailey felt helpless. So, the heroine pulled out the book she had hidden under her pillow a few days ago, thinking, well, I might as well read this. It was Hailey Duncan's diary, which the heroine had brought back from the duchy. The real Hailey's birthday was October 17th. The little spirit asked the girl how she could see him, because many priests had come to this room, but none of them had seen anything. But there were also truly powerful priests who could see spirits. Those guys were probably just lying. They pretend to be your benefactors, but they're actually trying to scam you out of your money. The moment you blink, they'll steal it from right under your nose. But the child reminded them that she didn't even have a nose. The heroine had specifically taken this diary, hoping to awaken her memories. Hailey had been living like an empty shell. The handmaiden Deborah suddenly knocked on the door. The heroine put the diary aside and let her in. Deborah brought a letter from the queen's family, along with some medicine, but the heroine refused it. She was no longer sick, but Hailey snatched the letter anyway. The Duke was very worried about his daughter's health and claimed to have sent the medicine with the letter as a sign of his concern. But she saw through it all. As a father, the Duke only wanted to ask his daughter one thing. Hailey was now very curious. The heroine needed to find the king as soon as possible, as she learned from Deborah that he was in the reception room. Deborah also said she was on her way to call the queen's attendants to dress her up. Hailey didn't know how to respond to the Duke. The original owner of this body, the one who was supposed to be queen, had almost no emotions left. When the soul departs, emotions go with it. Only those who harbor deep hatred or grand ideals break the rules. They become vengeful spirits or guardian spirits and remain in this world. The Duke knew that many people in the castle served the king, but he still wanted to send people from his own territory. At that moment, inside the reception hall, a heated debate about the misappropriation of royal funds was underway, and Roderick had to listen to the whole thing. A piercing sound rang out, startling the officials, who then all looked towards their king. Roderick asked coldly, "Are you finished?" Perhaps there's someone else in this room who hasn't spoken. Jade knew the king was extremely dangerous in this state, and if the situation worsened, he would have to stop him. In the 3 years of his reign, his dark side had grown stronger, and he looked like a completely different person. Two people happened to witness this terrifying scene at the worst possible moment. Deborah suggested the queen go back first, and Hailey nodded in agreement. The heroine decided to stay out of it, but evil spirits began to gather above the king, laughing loudly and demanding they kill everyone in the room immediately. This made Hailey very worried. Suddenly, the king grabbed his sword and began to draw it from its sheath. The heroine froze in fear at the sight. The captain of the first squad immediately jumped up, determined to stop the king from making an irreversible mistake. But Hailey was faster. The evil spirits were constantly whispering their desires into the king's ear. The heroine rushed towards his majesty and grabbed the hand that held the drawn sword. In fact, Hailey had run over. she unconsciously started blaming Deborah, feeling she should have held on tighter. The moment Roderick heard Hailey Duncan's voice pleading with him to listen, his dazed expression cleared instantly. The heroine noticed it too. The light had returned to the man's eyes. Only then did she realize it was the beads that were working. So the evil spirits retreated a little. The king looked at the young girl in surprise and softly spoke her name. He didn't know what had just happened, nor why Hailey Duncan was holding his hand. The man glanced at the officials, who were scared into silence, not daring to say a word. Roddy gently pulled his hand from Hailey Duncan's and sheathed his sword. The heroine flinched when the king turned to face her. He asked only one question. Why? Hailey froze. This was all his doing. Now the look in his eyes seemed to say, "Don't make me say it again." Hailey had actually come to discuss the letter from Duke Duncan, but since the king and the duke were on bad terms, it would stir up the king's negative emotions. The evil spirits would go out of control, so Hailey lied. She said she had just come for tea, but had chosen the wrong time, and quickly apologized for her rudeness. When she explained that she just wanted to thank him for the medicine he sent, Roddy gave her a suspicious look. The officials were on edge the entire time. The heroine mentally pleaded with Deborah to help her out. The handmaiden quickly understood and explained to His Majesty that the queen was very fond of fine Russian rock tea. In the end, Roderick ordered tea for them, and Hailey mentally praised Deborah for being the best. The king declared the meeting for the day to be over. Meanwhile, our protagonists went for tea. The heroine took only a small sip and immediately tasted how awful it was, but she tried to remain composed. At the same time, the king was staring intently at her, and Hailey immediately felt awkward. She froze when His Majesty suddenly asked what she was thinking. But what he was really interested in was why she did it, and why she continued to drink the awful tea. The guy quickly saw through Hailey's act. The heroine wiped her lips and told His Majesty that he couldn't judge her tastes. She said the same thing again. Hailey realized once more that the king wasn't actually a harsh person and could even joke around. The problem was he had some very terrifying spirits clinging to him. As soon as the man sat a little further away from her, those disgusting corpses would start to latch onto him. This guy really unsettled Hailey. It was disgusting to look at no matter what. So the heroine walked up to the king and asked if he had been sleeping well lately. Roderick retorted, "Is it that obvious I haven't been sleeping well?" "Yes, very obvious." The heroine gathered her courage and then plopped down right next to His Majesty. She gently touched his hand and began to massage the king's palm. The knights standing behind them widened their eyes. Their queen had just made a move that could get her into big trouble. A look of surprise appeared on Roderick's face. This was too out of line. Everyone in the palace knew their relationship had basically dropped to a freezing point. Jade hoped the king's temper wouldn't explode. However, Roderick showed a playful smile and asked, "What are you doing?" She said, "This will help you fall asleep faster." Hailey admitted she used to have insomnia too. The playful smile on Roderick's face didn't fade. This girl wasn't even trying to hide her lies. Hailey now realized that the king had been tormented by evil spirits for so long that his energy was tangled and blocked. For someone with this kind of energy, this would be even more fatal if it continued. But Roderick still didn't understand what she was doing. Hailey knew better than anyone how energy flowed through the body. Before her grandmother performed an exorcism, it was the heroine's job to control the person's energy. She asked the king if it hurt. He said it didn't. Hailey started massaging his back. Roderick was a bit dazed and thanked her for her concern. People with strong energy don't attract vengeful spirits. Hailey wondered just how many bad things this guy had done to incur their wrath. The heroine pressed a pressure point, and Roderick immediately felt a strange sensation. Hailey had almost mastered the flow of energy. The man didn't know what was happening. Then a warm current spread throughout his body, and his eyes slowly closed. His body went limp, and Roderick's head came to rest on the heroine's lap as he fell into a deep sleep. The energy flow quickened slightly. Now, the king could deal with the onslaught of evil spirits a little more easily. But the heroine was still silently apologizing in her heart. There was nothing more she could do. The captain of the first squad blinked in surprise and asked, "Is he really asleep?" Hailey shrugged. When you get a massage while exhausted, the tension melts away. The king was probably worn out. Jade blinked in confusion. His Majesty hadn't slept in days, and the king had been struggling with insomnia recently. The captain of the first squad was trying to recall what had just happened. Hailey said that people can become very sensitive sometimes. Don't get worked up over it. He had no choice. The butler brought a blanket and gently draped it over the king. The man noticed Deborah's disapproving gaze. It's time to get another blanket for his majesty. But Hailey shook her head and, "Oh, we've finished our tea. It's time to go." Roderick held the girl tighter. Hailey understood at once. The people behind her must be up to something. Sure enough, the heroine felt a chill inside. This king named Roderick was instinctively searching for pure energy simply because of the amulet on the heroine. Perhaps because he had long been tormented by dark, impure forces, he wanted to find a place of peace. In the end, Hailey asked for a blanket, and they brought it to her. Deborah immediately took the blanket from a butler. Hailey was tired too. This was different from when she infused energy into her amulets. It was tiring to be around this man, but for some reason, Hailey felt a sense of warmth. Roderick blinked awake in confusion, realizing his situation, but he decided to ask Jade anyway. The captain of the first squad reminded His Majesty that as soon as he had tea with the queen, she sat next to him, but the king fell asleep immediately after. Jade decided not to mention how the newlyweds massaged each other before bed, as he couldn't bring himself to say it. Roderick turned his gaze to the sleeping girl. He decided he needed to settle the queen somewhere comfortable, and the best place for that was his bedroom. Jade was stunned when he heard this. Meanwhile, the king explained that this was to avoid waking the queen, as her room was far away. The butler and the handmaiden began to suspect that something had happened between the king and queen on their wedding night, after all. But Jade immediately shouted at them to hurry up and follow His Majesty's orders. Deborah replied that she would go and prepare the room at once. Roderick's physical condition had suddenly improved again. He glanced at Hailey Duncan, wondering who on earth she was. A while later, the heroine woke up and immediately thought she had somehow ended up in hell. Maybe she had just died in her sleep, or perhaps she had been reincarnated again. But her pink hair and pale fingers told a different story. The heroine was still in Hailey's body, which meant she must still be alive. From the surroundings and the swarms of evil spirits, the young woman concluded that this was the king's room. She immediately wanted to leave. The handmaiden Deborah entered the room as soon as she heard that His Majesty had woken from his long sleep. The heroine painfully pleaded with the woman to take her back to her own room. In the end, Hailey managed to escape the haunted house, and on the way back, she learned that it was the king who had asked for her to be brought to his room. The girl found this amusing and laughed. It was clear the king just wanted to repay her. Somehow, Hailey didn't realize until now that she had forgotten to mention the letter from the diary. The lady had written in it that her father wanted to marry her off to the king, but she was madly in love with Lawrence. However, all the entries were brief and the context was strange. The heroine wanted to learn more about the real Hailey. With her father's letter in hand, the girl wondered what Hailey would have done in her place. Come to think of it, the king had proposed dinner together today, and Hailey was shocked by the sudden invitation. The heroine went to the window and found herself thinking that she didn't want to die. The girl couldn't understand why the truly ignorant Hailey had drowned. Apparently, fate was unavoidable. Even if you could dodge minor troubles, you couldn't change the course of destiny, just like the deceased Hailey, whose fate was to die. People always say they love their fate, but that's only what people who can't see the future say. The heroine had never loved her fate, not even once. Come to think of it, this was the first dinner between the king and Hailey. Roderick hadn't invited her just to have a nice time. A few days ago, the commander of the First Order of Knights reported that Duke Duncan had sent a letter to the queen. Jade had brought a copy for the king to see. The letter talked about bringing the Duke's people into the palace, and the sender knew the queen was ill. It was obvious that Duke Duncan wanted to plant his own people in the palace. He knew Roderick wouldn't agree, so he wanted to use this to start a power struggle with him. The king needed to nip this in the bud right now. That's why they wanted to install an insignificant noble lady in the queen's place. Roderick suggested using this opportunity to find out what kind of person Hailey Duncan really was. But the king didn't know how to start the conversation. These thoughts had been plaguing Roderick. Jade knew His Majesty was still not feeling well today. The butler announced the arrival of Her Majesty the Queen, and Roderick immediately looked up. His eyes cleared up instantly. He raised his head and looked in the direction where the sound of Her Majesty the Queen's footsteps came from. The man immediately stood up and found that the air around him had suddenly become fresh. This happened at the exact moment Hailey appeared. He glanced at her pensive expression and noticed that with every step she took, a fresh breeze seemed to blow, as if another world was centered around her. Amazingly, his headache was gone. The heroine looked on in confusion as His Majesty took a deep breath. He said with a smile on his face, "This is really strange." Hailey didn't know what was happening, and the king replied with a playful smile, "You can come over and sit down." The heroine did as he wished. Roderick refocused his intense gaze on the girl. Hailey gathered her courage and told His Majesty she had something to say, and the king allowed it. The heroine said that she had received a letter from her father in the duchy a few days ago. Jade, standing behind the king, didn't expect the girl to bring it up herself. Roderick let out a playful smile at the thought that this girl had beaten him to it, as he had completely forgotten his original purpose. She relayed the contents of the letter, which she had also brought in case the king wanted to see it. The king leaned back in his chair, dismissed it, and asked her what she was going to do. Hailey was stunned that the king was giving her the choice this time. He remembered the moment he told her to die after putting on the crown. Otherwise, he would do it himself. The king listened to her and burst out laughing. Jade was completely confused as to why His Majesty would yield to the other's argument. Hailey complained with a frown, "Is this choice fair?" Roderick laughed again. "It's outrageous how straightforward you are." He realized he hadn't laughed like this in years. This girl was so amusing. Roderick told her to continue. From the atmosphere, the heroine could feel that everything was under control. She wasn't sure what Hailey wanted, so she decided to state her own opinion first. She didn't want to be manipulated by the king and the duke, and she refused to treat the real Hailey's life as a game. So, the heroine decided to write a letter to her father refusing him. These words took His Majesty by surprise. Hailey hadn't been in the palace for long, so to others, this might seem unfair. Jade was glad they wouldn't have to fight another pointless battle with the Duncan family. But Roderick thought it was too early to let his guard down. On the surface, this answer might be good enough. To everyone's surprise, the queen had given a reason for her refusal instead of just shifting the blame to him. Even though Hailey refused, it wouldn't be right to completely cut ties with the duke. Anything could happen in the future, and adding the word "for now" left room for future negotiations. Roderick knew his wife was just feigning innocence. She had thought it all through. You could say she had the real stuff flowing through her veins like a cunning fox. Hailey Duncan was an interesting woman, but she still gave Roderick the creeps. Sometimes the butler would bring food, and she asked if she could eat after His Majesty was done talking. Roderick told the heroine not to wait for him. From now on, the more he got to know her, the more she intrigued him. But with all this, things were starting to get a little dangerous. Even if just a little, Roderick began to feel himself being drawn to the daughter of the Duchess of Duncan. Perhaps it was because his madness was intensifying. The king picked up a cup, remembering an important detail. This week he was planning to go hunting, so he wouldn't be in the castle. The heroine froze when she heard this news. According to the first of the 5 commandments of God, you must not take a life, as it accumulates karma. Roderick, the ruling beast of Peru's Blake, had a nickname based on his second name, which was the Raging Beast. This nickname came from his madness. Roderick knew he couldn't control his impulses and tried to channel them through hunting, but he was unknowingly pushing himself into deeper madness. The more blood he saw, the more he suffered from the vengeful spirits. The heroine watched the king as he was asking the knights if they had checked the supplies. Hailey wanted to tell His Majesty that killing was a bad idea, but she knew he would just find it ridiculous. Roderick turned his head and stared at the girl. Then he decided to ride up to her. The man asked in a cold tone if she had anything to say to him before he left. Hailey thought to herself that outside the castle, it was less easy for evil spirits to latch on, and asked what he meant. Roderick suggested she ask him to catch something, but the heroine refused the offer. The man then suggested wishing him a safe trip, which Hailey did, though in her heart, she only wished the king would stay put. He suddenly pointed to the side and asked if the heroine would do the same over there. Hailey turned her gaze to the knights and handmaidens who were seeing him off. The man suddenly pulled her close and kissed her. The heroine immediately blushed. Hailey couldn't believe the king would expect her to do something like that to him. Seeing her reaction, Roderick burst out laughing again. He told her with a playful smile that he was just kidding. Hearing this, Hailey became even more flustered, until the king told her she was just standing there with her mouth open. The heroine puffed out her cheeks and turned her head to the side, while the king said in a slightly hurt tone that it was amusing. Hailey asked His Majesty to return safely and, most importantly, without getting hurt. Roderick smiled and replied that he would. His behavior was starting to get on the heroine's heroine's nerves. The man suddenly moved closer to Hailey Duncan and whispered in her ear, telling her to stay away from the water. He took a small step back, paused for a moment to look her over, their lips unsettlingly close. Then he straightened up and asked her if she had received the message, probably afraid she would jump down like Hailey. In other words, he didn't want her to die. The protagonist's ears instantly turned bright red and began to itch like crazy. Roderick smiled smugly, said he had to go, and then returned to his nights. Watching him leave, the protagonist wondered if everything would be all right from now on. The captain of the first squad advised the king not to chase the wild boar, as the forest was dangerous at night. But Roderick didn't listen to the advice and took down the beast anyway. Darkness filled his eyes, and all sounds fell silent. He knew he shouldn't be doing this, for the sake of the kingdom and his people. If she were here now, things would be different. But now, the evil spirits were still urging Roderick to slaughter as many animals as possible. The moment they caught up with the king, Jade reined in his horse. The knights couldn't believe that someone in the world could be cruel enough to strike an already dead animal. Roderick was like a different person now, as if all hope was lost. As the leaves rustled, a flash of fear crossed Jade's face. A huge bear was standing before his majesty. The commander of the first night squad ordered his men to shoot the beast immediately and for the king to step back, but Roderick didn't hear a word. In an instant, the man's eyes turned pitch black. The night was late, but for some reason, the protagonist couldn't fall asleep. If he continued killing like this, his condition would only get worse, a thought that terrified the protagonist. But Hailey didn't understand why this bothered her so much. Finally, the girl decided to go out for a walk. The moon was bright, and soon, Hailey entered the garden of the huge castle. She saw the nearby lake, but she had no intention of going that way, especially after what old Mrs. Johnson had said. Perhaps because she had been warned not to go near water all her life, the protagonist started by just watching from a distance. Hailey decided to sit down on the steps. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew. The protagonist's eyes widened when she felt a familiar energy nearby. The spirit she had seen at the wedding was now standing right next to her. For some reason, he dismounted his horse, and then the spirit sat down beside her. Even the god her grandmother worshipped was nothing like this, so Hailey absolutely couldn't have anything to do with him. But a smug smile immediately appeared on his face, and the spirit asked if she could see him. The protagonist silently pleaded for the creature to stop talking to her in that matter-of-fact tone. Hailey felt the best thing to do was to just walk away. Just as she was about to get up, the spirit whispered that she was not the real Hailey Duncan. The protagonist almost let something slip, but managed to control her emotions. The spirit told the young woman that Roderick was on his way here now, and he was injured. Hailey continued to ignore him, and the spirit added that the injury might be serious. But the king didn't even have an heir, so no one knew what would happen if he suddenly died. Startled by the spirit's words, Hailey shot to her feet. The guy laughed, grinning that she could hear him after all. The protagonist asked sharply if he really intended to joke about someone's life. Everyone was always like this now. Hailey didn't understand why they all treated ordinary people this way. The spirit smiled, told her to calm down, and added that Roderick was really hurt. Maybe it was just a lie. But Hailey was still powerless. The spirit told the queen to hurry, that if she ran now, she would be just in time to see him. Then the thing vanished. Hailey had to get to the castle where that guy was immediately. The captain of the first squad told his majesty that the castle was just ahead and to hold on a little longer. Darkness filled Roderick's vision, and he silently prayed for someone to help him. The protagonist ran all the way until she smelled blood, which meant the king had returned. The knights rode straight to the butler and loudly ordered him to wake the doctor at once. Hailey had no idea how the king had gotten himself involved with a whole host of evil spirits again. The knights ordered for him to be taken directly back to his bedroom, completely unaware that they shouldn't do that. The protagonist's mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Despite her doubts, she made up her mind. She yanked open the door with a sound loud enough to startle the sleeping pixie. Then Hailey rushed to the table and grabbed a few talismans. The pixie blinked at her, asking what on earth she was doing. When he saw that her target was the strange thing under the bed, he began to beg her not to do it. Hailey walked towards the door, vowing to take care of everything when she returned. The pixie started to cry, waking up to chaos. If his mind and body weakened, the evil spirits would grow stronger, and the king's life was already hanging by a thread. Hailey prayed that these would work. When she reached the king's room, she saw him still clutching his bloody sword, stabbing at the thing that was already dead. The protagonist pushed past all the servants, demanding they let her through. A knight tried to persuade Her Majesty not to enter. In the king's bedchambers, Deborah ran over, demanding that Hailey return to her bedroom at once. The protagonist reminded them that she was the queen, which meant she could go anywhere in the castle. A doctor appeared from behind the maid, shouting for everyone to step back immediately. Hailey slipped into the room behind him. At the doorway, the young woman was stunned by the oppressive atmosphere in the room. Monsters crowded the entire space, howling with glee, demanding that Roderick kill at once. Fear made Hailey cover her mouth. The captain of the first squad stared at Her Majesty with surprise and confusion, not understanding why she was here. He handed the queen a handkerchief, telling her to cover her nose because the room was filled with the smell of blood. But Hailey refused, because it wasn't the smell of blood, but of negative energy. Only then did she notice the claw marks on the man's body. The injury wasn't serious, not enough to be life-threatening. In other words, that arrogant spirit had played a trick on her. The doctor was terrified when His Majesty collapsed to his knees. The protagonist began to blame herself for believing the ghost's words again. She tensed up when she heard His Majesty muttering something under his breath while conscious. Only then did Hailey realize he was saying kill. The king was repeating the words the evil spirits had been feeding him. Roderick's eyes were wide open, but his gaze was empty, completely ignoring everyone in the room. When His Majesty raised his sword, both the queen and the doctor tensed up. If spiritual wounds counted as injuries, then this man was suffering a fatal blow every day. But no one could explain why, and no one could heal him. Roderick was alone. The protagonist grabbed the king's hand. A knight immediately tried to stop the queen, as it was extremely dangerous. As she anxiously asked how he was, Roderick turned his gaze to the protagonist. He opened his eyes, but he didn't regain consciousness. The evil spirits were too strong. So Hailey needed to initiate the fight first. The law must be upheld. The undead cannot defeat justice. The spirits immediately began to scream that if she kept provoking them, they wouldn't leave her in peace. At first, Hailey hadn't intended to get involved in the affairs of ghosts, but now the situation was the exact opposite. There was no one else in this world who could help him, so the protagonist had no intention of backing down. She demanded that the evil forces disappear at once. She had to handle this period. Roderick was in complete darkness. He couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything. In the end, the hero, a truly mad king, was trapped in this darkness. But suddenly, Roderick saw a light. He looked up and gazed at the sky. Someone was calling him. Roderick reached out, still wondering who it could be. The man didn't know who the beautiful voice belonged to. Regaining consciousness, Roderick let out a weak groan. Hailey anxiously asked the king if he was okay and if he could hear her. Roderick looked at the girl in shock as she asked another question. Could he see her? As soon as the evil spirits vanished, the king's sword fell to the floor with a clatter. The protagonist said softly that everything was all right now. The healer cleared his throat and said the injuries weren't serious, so the king would be fine. Hailey had used up too much of her strength and immediately felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. In a hoarse voice, Roderick asked the girl why she was here, but the protagonist didn't have a clear answer either, guessing that she had simply been scared at the time. The king could have just said thank you for showing up, but Hailey decided to remain silent about it. Now that he was back to normal, the girl could return to her own room. But Roderick suddenly grabbed her wrist, his voice filled with both sorrow and hope as he asked Hailey to stay a little longer. For a moment, the king became very gentle. Ever since the queen appeared, everything had felt like a dream. The protagonist's heart raced. She pulled her hand back and told him not to force himself. Roderick's face fell. The protagonist knew this moment would eventually come. She started pounding on him with her fists, demanding that he never go on a hunt like that again. Hailey stopped when the king spoke. He asked why, his whole body trembling. But Roderick still smiled and asked why he shouldn't go. Hailey replied with tears in her eyes that she was very fond of animals. Deborah and Jade were convinced the king had finally gone mad. Roderick raised his hand, praised everyone for a job well done, and then asked everyone except the queen to leave. The protagonist realized her embarrassment too late. She cursed her own actions, wondering why she was being so out of character. Roderick looked closely at the trembling girl. The protagonist looked at him in surprise when the man said he had seen a light in the darkness. Then he held out his hand, and Hailey reached out and took it. Just like now, In other words, the king had a dream while the protagonist was exorcising the evil spirits. Roderick guessed the girl must have seen a lot of terrible things coming here, but he didn't want to dwell on it. The truth is, there's nothing you can do about it. It might sound irresponsible and helpless, but Roderick confessed to Hailey Duncan that he was powerless against it. So this guy knew exactly what was happening to him and how bad it was, but his eyes were still bright. Could those really be the eyes of a man who had accumulated bad karma? Hailey couldn't pretend she didn't know, while this man was tearing himself apart all alone. The king asked if she was angry with him for the trouble he caused, but the girl said she couldn't be. Roderick replied, "You are a Duncan, you are the queen. If you're not angry, can you at least talk to me a little longer?" For some reason, Roderick felt alive again when she spoke. It was the protagonist's energy and things like rosaries and talismans, and not her voice, but Hailey still agreed to stay and began to tell the king something. 2 days later, at the royal castle, the queen was sick again, so Duke Duncan requested that a maid they were familiar with be sent to take care of her. This guy was up to his old tricks again. In reality, Hailey had been working hard to rebuild the barrier in her bedroom and had fallen ill as a result. Meanwhile, Duke Duncan shouted, "My daughter cannot make such a request." Roderick reminded him, "She is not just your daughter, she is now the Queen of Cain, and you need to address her properly." The Duke apologized for his rudeness, saying he was just overcome with emotion at the news about his favorite child. The king scoffed at this. He clearly remembered how this father had slapped his beloved daughter in public. However, if Roderick were to say such a thing here, the queen's authority could be damaged. Normally, a man wouldn't think twice and just shoot, but the atmosphere was not good right now. The Duke said that in that case, he would go to the queen himself to ask for her permission. Hailey's father had a look on his face as if she would submit to his will because of her weakness. But Roderick didn't understand why these scoundrels thought she was a pushover. He smiled smugly and retorted, "Is someone stopping you from seeing the queen?" Jade flinched, looking at the king in confusion. Roderick told the Duke to go see his daughter because he knew she wasn't that kind of person. The captain of the first squad didn't understand how the king could let the Duke see the queen. Roderick didn't answer, instead asking Jade if he had done his duty. At the start of the investigation into the lady, he had reported that Hailey Duncan was known as a pretty fool, but all of that had turned out to be complete nonsense. Roderick approached the queen's room and asked how she was doing. The pixie immediately tensed up. King Roderick had brought those terrifying creatures with him again. The man walked in and told the girl to stay seated. He immediately felt surprisingly at ease. The protagonist was proud. She had finally succeeded in creating a great barrier this time. As soon as Hailey's health began to improve, she suddenly fell ill again, as if in punishment for the king's hunting trip. Roderick told the queen that her father was still demanding to send someone to the palace, picturing the Duke's face. Hailey smiled smugly. Roderick warned that if she smiled again, he would turn into a petty scoundrel. Hailey immediately covered her mouth with her hands. The man carefully studied the girl's pale face. The queen was caught off guard when the king asked if he should assign members of the Duncan family to her. Jade was furious at the king's actions. Hailey reminded His Majesty that he had given her a choice again. She wondered again why he did this. Roderick answered thoughtfully, admitting he didn't have a proper answer. The guy decided he just wanted to test her reaction again. It felt good to feel in control. The protagonist retorted that she would write another letter of refusal, and this time the message would be clearer. Roderick had no idea what the girl was up to. He froze when his gaze fell on the small wooden figurine. By Hailey's bedside, everyone else froze. The king leaned in and asked her what she needed that thing for. Jade's face turned red, and Deborah hissed to the butler that nothing had happened on the king and queen's wedding night. Nothing at all. Hailey explained in an innocent tone that it was just her hobby. She showed the king her bracelet and asked for her knife back to finish her masterpiece. Roderick complained that people usually prefer bigger ones. The protagonist stammered that bigger isn't necessarily stronger. He replied in a tense voice that was true, but his was big enough. Although Roderick didn't know what it was, he ordered it to be hidden. A blushing maid announced to His Majesty that it was time for his medicine. Roderick once again decided that this girl was really strange. He looked annoyed, even a little hurt, as the protagonist drank the nasty medicine. His eyelids began to droop. Hailey looked at the man in surprise. His Majesty had dozed off. The butler wondered aloud what to do about this sudden insomnia, since even sleeping pills didn't work on the king. As soon as the queen entered, Roderick completely relaxed. Jade wondered if the rumors about some secret power hidden in the Duncan family's blood were true. Hailey yanked the king's leg, startling him awake and scolded him for dozing off like that. Roderick's eyes flew open in shock. He hadn't expected to fall asleep. The hero was just thinking about a problem, and before he knew it, he had fallen asleep in front of everyone. For some reason, he suddenly felt like he could sleep like a baby. The protagonist tensed up when His Majesty said he was coming closer and began to lean in. He put his leg on the bed and asked if he could lie down next to her. Deborah immediately started shooing the bewildered men out of the room. The maid wished them a good time and then left the room, leaving Hailey and the king alone. The girl wanted the king to go back to his own room, but looked more like a haunted house. Roderick promised not to do anything, explaining that he just wanted a good night's sleep. The protagonist wanted to give him her pillow, but the king refused. The girl's face turned bright red. She lay down and reminded the king in a sour tone that he had decided to support her true love, and now he was getting into her bed. Roderick laughed, calling it cute, as he hadn't expected her to say something like that. To her husband, she apologized, admitting she didn't know why she had seized the opportunity. To be honest, Hailey was exhausted, so she was sure she would fall asleep soon. The king suddenly decided to apologize for their wedding night. The protagonist froze when she saw the intense look in his eyes. She wondered when this had started, but what he had just said really did sound like an apology. Roderick thought the nightgown had been torn unintentionally last time, although he couldn't quite believe it himself. The king told the protagonist that if he became aggressive again, not to put up with it, but to call for Jade or someone else. Now Roderick was talking about the nightgown that Hailey had torn off to use as a talisman. The protagonist repeated that it wasn't him who did it. It seemed the king was still bothered by what happened then. Roderick chuckled softly and suggested they get some sleep, but Hailey knew he didn't believe her. Still, she couldn't tell the truth. The evil spirits messing with her mind and the harm she caused others. It was all too much to shake off. She still didn't understand why she kept getting involved when she had a pile of her own troubles. A big, tough guy, but still not broken. Our heroes went to sleep, by which time the servants had redone all the chores in the castle. When the protagonist woke up, she couldn't breathe, feeling a tightness in her chest. She opened her eyes to see what was going on. It turned out she had been sleeping locked tightly in His Majesty's iron grip. A silent scream of terror erupted from her throat. Now she would never trust a man again. To this man, the protagonist was just a body pillow and a sleeping pill. Hailey's face instantly turned as red as a tomato. The girl tried to focus on the fact that he was sick and very lonely, and not to take it to heart. The protagonist was already thinking about counting sheep, to fall asleep, but the man moved closer, and a strange object brushed against her body, making her panic even more. Hailey kept counting sheep, but in her mind, they were already making out. The protagonist needed to escape her fate as a virgin ghost and enjoy the afterlife. The king suddenly pulled her even closer. Hailey didn't know why he kept touching her. She tried to push him away a little so as not to feel so awkward, but the man kept sleeping. Suddenly, he brought his hand right up to his face. He moved closer to her neck, and she froze. Now she could feel the king's hot, steady breath, and her heart beat faster. Suddenly, Hailey felt the king's lips on her neck. She tried to gasp for air, but could barely manage it. Finally, the protagonist started pounding on his back, demanding that he get off her at once. With that, Roderick finally woke up. The girl under him muttered in confusion. This position was really strange. Roderick immediately pulled away. The protagonist finally caught her breath, while her heart was still pounding. The man couldn't believe he had messed up again. Hailey flinched when the king pulled up the blanket. He was relieved. Her clothes weren't torn, so he hadn't done anything. Roderick immediately apologized. He touched her shoulder and apologized again. The man asked softly, "How scared were you?" The protagonist turned to the king, and now he saw her pouting, hurt face. He jumped up and told her, "Get some rest, okay?" But he couldn't just walk away, so he pleaded with Hailey to answer. She remained silent, so he asked, "Are you really just going to ignore me?" That's a bit childish. The real problem wasn't that Hailey was scared, just that she was very shocked. It was hot, her heart was pounding, and every place the king had touched tingled and itched. Now that he was being so warm and gentle, the girl wanted to act like a child. She had never felt this way before. Roderick apologized again and gently rubbed her head. The man walked out, but the protagonist's heart was still beating wildly. She didn't know what this feeling was, but she was certain she would lose sleep. The king, meanwhile, nervously tapped his foot on the floor. It had been over 10 days since the king's last visit to the queen's chambers. Lord Chamberlain Jimmy was very eager to know what had happened, but the captain of the First Knightly Order knew nothing. Roderick still hadn't gone back. The queen might be embarrassed, but he was starting to wonder if her intense gaze back then had been too much. They were still husband and wife, and Roderick had a question. What exactly was he supposed to do next? The fact that this marriage was clearly not of the Queen's own volition made Roderick all the more agitated. Lord Chamberlain Jimmy placed a jewelry box before the king, explaining it was a gift from the Diamond District. Roderick asked Jade to confirm if he had seen the Queen's bracelet, and Jade nodded in confirmation. The king thought the ornament was absolutely terrible, like something outdated trying to outdo a modern style. The man's mind flashed to his wife, who had told him she had made the bracelet with her own hands. A faint smile touched Roderick's face. When he once again referred to Hailey as that strange girl, Jade assumed the king was simply resentful of a rival he personally cared a great deal about. The captain of the First Knightly Order realized something must have happened between the queen and the king. The heroine, meanwhile, set off to delve into the royal family's genealogy. The librarian said that only members of the royal family could consult those records, so he would fetch something else instead. Hailey reminded him that as the queen, his wife, she was also a member of the royal family. The man quickly explained it was just a copy, and there were more suitable documents for Her Majesty the Queen to read. The librarian fell to his knees, convinced he had just committed a grave sin. The heroine decided to take a look anyway, promising to be careful with it. As soon as Hailey returned to her room, she had the soul read the contents aloud, but the child refused, telling her to get a book she could read herself. She pointed to her diary, saying she hadn't even read that since she started living here. Hailey's fragmented memories alone were not enough. The heroine decided to read her diary. The real Hailey had rambled on, recording the most absurd details of her life. Finally, the child agreed to read the book. The first king, Arthur, used the holy sword to conquer the Daemon Empire, which had ruled the continent with cruel spells and established the kingdom. To celebrate the centennial, the fourth king strengthened ties with the Morin, Roselle, and Duncan families to achieve national unification. The heroine now realized that the House of Duncan had originally been a separate nation. All the while, Hailey was taking down every word. She was shocked when the soul only mentioned King Roderick's date of birth and the time of his accession, but she also discovered that her husband was now 29 years old. A 4-year difference from her previous age, and an 8-year difference from the real Hailey, much older than she had expected. This was perhaps why the king sometimes treated her like a child. She also discovered that the plight of the Kian kingdom and King Roderick's struggles this year coincided. Moreover, during this period, Queen Hailey had died, and a soul from another world had entered this one. Suddenly, the soul mentioned that King Roderick hadn't been coming here lately. He was glad because those awful things didn't follow him. In reality, the heroine was trying her best not to think about it. She had embarrassed him that day, so he probably didn't want to see her face. The heroine was long accustomed to people avoiding her. As soon as the queen entered the hallway, Deborah approached and said she could have just ordered the book to be returned. Hailey said it was fine and immediately recognized a familiar sound. King Roderick was sparring with the captain of the First Knightly Order. She hadn't seen him in a long time. For some reason, the heroine's heart began to beat faster again. The lady-in-waiting mentioned that His Majesty and Sir Jade had studied under the same master and used to spar often, but Deborah hadn't seen such a scene in a long time. Roderick now looked like a sleek and powerful beast. Suddenly, the heroine felt His Majesty's energy becoming clearer with every breath. Perhaps being with a close friend was slowly calming him. She silently urged him to do just that. It's better to do more of this than go hunting. Hailey glanced sadly at the king and told Deborah to keep walking. He clearly didn't want to see her. Roderick stopped, wiping the sweat from his brow. He suddenly turned, and in an instant, the man caught up with the heroine and grabbed her hand. It was shocking because, just a second ago, His Majesty was at the other end of the room. Roderick, out of breath, asked Hailey Duncan why she was just walking away. The heroine hesitated for a moment, saying she was just returning to her room. Roderick frowned, asking her why she always spoke that way and telling her to be direct. She had assumed he was avoiding her, so she had tried to keep her distance. When Hailey said he could go back to what he was doing and she would leave, the king's expression darkened. Roderick ran a hand through his hair, muttering that she was truly a Duncan, always making people sweat nervously. But he then countered that she wasn't the one speaking out of turn. Suddenly, the king produced a bracelet and offered it to Hailey. The heroine hesitantly took the ornament, her eyes widening as she asked if he was really giving this to her. Roderick frowned, saying the bracelet looked awkward on her wrist. Jade chimed in that the king was as blunt as ever. He usually paid no mind to jewelry, but the moment he saw this bracelet, he claimed it belonged to Her Majesty the Queen and put it away. Roderick immediately blushed and told Jade to shut up. The heroine laughed at the thought that someone like him could have such an adorable side. The king couldn't take his eyes off the girl's smile, and his sword fell to the ground with a clang. Then he offered to walk with the queen. The heroine was caught off guard by the offer, but His Majesty explained they were going where she was going. Jade yelled at His Majesty, "You're the one who dragged me here." Hailey laughed out loud again, clearly enjoying the scene between the king and Jade. Roderick's gaze immediately drifted to the queen, his cheeks slightly flushed. People say a sparring match between a married couple is like cutting water with a knife. As the heroes walked down the corridor, the king asked the girl how she had been lately. She nodded. The king frowned. "Don't you usually ask back?" Hailey repeated his question. Roderick replied that he was afraid to come see her, worried about making her uncomfortable. The heroine asked in confusion why. The king replied, "I was hurt that day too, because you looked at me as if I were nothing." Hailey laughed. "I was just so shocked, okay? It was then I realized that Your Majesty didn't hate me after all." The man turned his gaze to the queen, realizing he had been avoiding her for no reason. He stared at the gifted bracelet and asked if she really didn't like it. The heroine smiled, saying she liked everything and thanked him for the wonderful gift. But her hobby was hand-carving bracelets, which took a lot of effort. Roderick grabbed her wrist and said thoughtfully that her taste was really strange, not at all like a normal girl. Hailey told him not to judge her hobbies, which clearly stung the king. An evil spirit appeared behind His Highness, but the girl dealt with it effortlessly. Despite this, it was still the best ornament. The king didn't know why, but somehow his shoulders felt much lighter. Roderick decided to ask if she could really read the copy of the royal genealogy she had just borrowed. It was written in a language Hailey couldn't possibly have learned. The Duncan family had no right to read it, but the girl said she was just curious and took a look. So the king's every move was being reported, perhaps because she was the daughter of his political enemy. But deep down, the librarian was really worried that his comments about the royal family might have somehow offended Her Majesty the Queen. Roddy felt she was still adjusting to court life, so he told her that there was a place in this castle called Arthur's Forest. They had just been talking about the genealogy. So Hailey had no idea why Arthur's Forest was suddenly mentioned. She felt she had heard the name before, but maybe it was just her memory. Roddy said it was a sacred forest that had been passed down since the founding of the kingdom, which nobles and servants could not enter, only the royal family members themselves. So he offered to take her there. The heroine was shocked by the offer, but she immediately agreed and took his hand. But Hailey didn't expect to see such a sight. She had never seen a place so full of sacred energy that she almost wanted to kneel and pray. But Roddy probably couldn't see the light or feel anything at all. Until now, the heroine had thought it was best for the king to stay away from the haunted castle, thinking the king instinctively wanted to leave, but she was completely wrong. The castle that housed Arthur's Forest was the strongest shield protecting the king from dark creatures. So an obvious question arose. When did it all start to go wrong? Eventually, the heroine would figure it out. The evil spirits tried everything to sneak in and get close to His Majesty, forcing him to make an irreversible mistake. But the forest shield never let them through. Now, not even the worst of the evil spirits could set foot in this forest. For the first time since the wedding, the heroine saw His Majesty radiating pure energy. Roderick told the girl to stop and rest. He had specifically laid a cloth on the rock so the queen wouldn't get cold or dirty her clothes. Hailey was caught off guard by the thoughtful gesture, and Roderick warned her not to come here without him. She asked if he didn't come here often, not noticing the fresh air around them. It turned out Roderick loved this place as much as she did. Hailey told him to come to this place more often from now on and reminded him to keep up his training like he had been with Jade recently. This was the only way for the king to win this brutal battle. But now the girl was speaking in a tone as if she were about to disappear. So Roderick asked what was on her mind. Hailey answered honestly that she wouldn't try to die anymore. People die when their time comes, right? So she asked His Majesty to return the small knife to her. The heroine swore she would only use it to carve bracelets. One is not enough, so we need to make as many of these as possible. Roderick took a deep breath and promised to return it, but the girl's words still felt strange to the king. So he still asked if she was trying to kill herself. In other words, Isn't that the same as not wanting to live at all? People die when their time comes, right? He had hit the nail on the head. Hailey really wanted to live. She had tried so hard, but no matter how much people fight, they cannot overcome fate. A gentle breeze blew by, and the king realized something was off. This girl was definitely a Duncan, but sometimes Roderick felt as if she lived in a completely different world. You must meditate every morning to purify your energy. So the heroine made a habit of it. Today, Hailey decided to start her day with meditation. First, the little spirit asked, "Are you going to open that book today too?" Hailey nodded quickly. She took out the book about the Qian kingdom. No one knew about the childhood of the young Arthur, the founding king and wielder of the Holy Sword. He rose with the Holy Sword and destroyed the empire with its divine power. With the collapse of the Daemon Empire, the various families began to split. The Morin, Roselle, and Duncan families later joined the new Qian kingdom. King Roderick was told that the movement to restore the Daemon Empire had been completely crushed. They kept telling him that, but the rebels had held out for several days. "Don't be arrogant and extinguish it before it gains momentum." The king clutched his head, and everyone began to think that another fit of madness was coming. A council member raised his hand and asked if the border troops were not enough. He asked if the Duke of Duncan was requesting the reinstatement of his eldest son, Albert, as commander of the Western Border Patrol. He was demoted 3 years ago for no reason. The Qian kingdom was pursuing a southern expansion strategy, so it wasn't exactly a demotion. The previous king had granted Arthur Duncan an honorary title, though for the duke's son, it was basically a worthless trinket. Tensions were rising between the king and the anti-royal faction led by the Duke of Duncan. Albert slammed his palm on the table, shouting that such remarks could be considered an insult to the crown, but Roderick just told the Duke to worry about his own life. He would not go easy on him just because he was the Queen's father. Then the king left the council chamber. The Duke of Duncan, however, was trembling with rage. The heroine was surprised when she was told His Majesty had arrived, and she stopped carving another handicraft. Roderick burst into the room, muttering that her father had clearly gone mad recently. Every time something went wrong, the king would come to see Her Majesty the Queen. Hailey couldn't help but smile. She was curious what her father had done this time to provoke such a strong reaction from His Majesty. Roderick sat down next to the Queen and explained that the Duke had requested the reinstatement of her brother's position. He really had a fine set of in-laws. But the heroine had no memory of this, so she decided to check Hailey's diary later. The thought of the diary made my heart clench. His Majesty suddenly asked the girl if his words had offended her. Jade scoffed inwardly. Wasn't insulting one's parents and siblings a signal to go to war? To everyone's surprise, she said, "I don't care." The king clearly knew that the Duncan family was not a harmonious one. Roderick remembered how coldly the Duke had treated his only daughter that day, so Hailey's words made sense. The girl had been ridiculed as a pretty flower vase, so Jade had never understood why the king questioned her reputation. But over the past few days, Jade was beginning to understand. The queen was not a fool. She handled whatever His Majesty threw at her with composure. Roderick complained to Hailey, "You have to watch who you're talking to." Sighs, but she explained, "If I get hurt, you'll take the knife back." Roderick laughed and promised, "I won't take it back. I'm not that cruel." The heroine told him to remember those words. They meant everything to her. His Majesty demanded an explanation so he could fully understand what this was all about. It wasn't as strange as everyone initially thought, but couldn't even be called an aesthetically pleasing ornament. Now, the heroine carved an object that looked almost identical to the one His Majesty was now holding in his hand. In fact, carving helped Hailey keep a clear head, but the king pointed out that this hobby was not suitable for someone her age. The heroine turned her head and retorted that he didn't look his age either. To Hailey, and honestly, to the narrator as well, he looked too young to be 8 years older than his wife. She didn't know that Roderick secretly felt sorry for her. The heroine laughed at his reaction. Roderick gently pulled her cheek, pouting like a child as he asked how she could laugh at the king. Then, the heroine handed him the carved talisman, saying it was his now. Roderick confessed he wanted to politely decline, but Hailey had poured her heart into this gift. But if he really didn't want it, she would take it back. But Roderick immediately asked for it back, saying he was just kidding. The heroine told me to put this thing under the bed. Although the talisman looked strange, it did a pretty good job of warding off bad luck and nightmares. Hailey had made this specifically so the king could get a good night's rest. With the heroine's abilities, she couldn't create a super cool talisman, but right now, King Roderick just needed a little help. She promised that there would be time times when someone's sincere prayers could protect his majesty. Roderick immediately blushed. The thing is, Hailey knew it wouldn't be easy for them to accept this whole situation, which would disrupt people's lives. It had even frustrated the heroine greatly before the king messed up his own hair and told the girl to shut up. She couldn't help but say it. After all, no matter how hard the hero tried to refuse, he still took the gift. The heroine raised a hand and said, "Wait." Hailey quickly produced another talisman and told the king to take this one too. Since it was her hobby, the heroine could make a whole bunch more of these. One of the talismans would surely feel left out, so the heroine smiled and asked the king to take both. Roderick's mind was instantly filled with wild thoughts. He snatched the gift from Hailey's hand, announced he was leaving, and told her not to follow. The door then slammed shut. The heroine found a new handicraft to make the next talisman, which surprised Jade. That girl was truly strange. That night, the king slept with her gift on the nightstand beside him. He finally managed to sleep, albeit poorly. Roderick wondered, could the queen's gift really have an effect? But that was impossible. But even so, Hailey was still a complete weirdo. To the king's surprise, this morning wasn't so bad after all. Roderick finally left the room, away from the talismans. Those nightly evil spirits had been disturbing their aura. When morning came, the heroine returned to her meditation. The little spirit asked how much longer they would keep this up, and Hailey replied that she was upset today. It turned out it was all because of Hailey's diary, which she had read at sunrise. Usually, the contents of the diary were so foolish they gave me a headache, but today was different. In one of the entries, the real Hailey was ready to talk to Lawrence, wanting to leave everything behind and leave Kian with him. The girl in the diary had always thought of herself as a complete fool, just as everyone around her said. Whenever the heroine thought of Hailey's crush, her heart began to ache. Hailey must have really liked Lawrence a lot. Even though Hailey's soul was dead, her heart remained in her body, like a burned-out ruin, along with the ashes. The heroine began to wonder how Lawrence had been doing lately. Suddenly, the girl heard some noise down the hallway. She asked the soul if he could hear what they were saying, and he said he could. The child said that Roderick was out of control again, and it was worse than usual today. This hadn't happened in a while, so Hailey was even starting to think the talismans she gave him were useless. It seemed she couldn't solve this problem on her own. The heroine had seen some shamans before who, out of compassion, tried to do things they couldn't handle and ended up ruining their own lives. It was wiser to turn a blind eye for now and stay out of it. Suddenly, the heroine's mind began to mix images of the king and Lawrence. The real Hailey definitely didn't want to forget Lawrence, and the heroine felt the same way, that she couldn't just ignore him. The knights did their best to restrain the furious king, but the evil spirits kept whispering that he belonged to them, so he had to kill. Finally, his majesty calmed down a little. The queen rushed to the king's side, eagerly asking how he was. There was no point in stopping her majesty anymore, so Jade replied that she wasn't as frantic as before. But the queen shouldn't get too close to him right now. But Hailey knew she would be fine, because Roderick was just trying to overcome a strong bout of madness. She called out to the king. She had come today to offer him tea. This time, the tea would surely be better. The king was in bad shape. If we used the bracelet normally, it would just break, but there was nothing we could do about it. If things got dangerous, Jade was ready to take control at any moment. He couldn't understand why the queen always intervened at such dangerous moments, completely unafraid of her husband. Hailey's body was trembling because she was still afraid of the evil spirits. But it was only the human heart that wavered. As long as she stuck to her goal, she could carry on. Those who follow the way of heaven will prosper. Those who go against it will perish. Finally, the king's gaze cleared, but his strength was rapidly draining from his body. Now the knights could easily let him go. The heroine caught her husband before he hit the floor. Hailey was stunned when Roderick could even manage to mumble something. He said he finally had a good night's sleep and that those ugly little wooden sticks Hailey gave him really worked. Roderick pleaded with the queen not to look at him like that. Then all his strength left him and he collapsed, pulling the heroine down with him. The knights helped carry the king to the reception room. The butler was shocked because as soon as the queen arrived this time, His Majesty immediately fell asleep. Roderick slowly opened his eyes. At that moment, Hailey was gently massaging the man's hand when the king suddenly told the girl not to come near him when he was like this, because he couldn't guarantee her safety, but those words weren't strong enough as a warning. The girl didn't intend to distribute the same small figurines to everyone and knew he had his own thoughts about it. Hailey reminded him that she was a Duncan and knew how to protect herself better than anyone. She told him to treat her like any other Duncan. She wanted to maintain a comfortable distance, so their relationship wouldn't become more strained than it already was. Although the king had asked before, he brought it up again, asking if she was the one who made it. The girl replied that it was good to relax after hard training, and he looked really exhausted. She always did this, telling white lies and hiding things to keep matters a bit vague. For some reason, the butler felt that Her Majesty the Queen was pressing the king more urgently than usual this time. Hailey asked Jade how long the king had been like this, and the captain said he had been unwell since morning, but that wasn't what the girl was curious about at all. She just wanted to know how long he had been a jerk. Jade said it started after Roderick ascended to the throne. He had headaches ever since, but they had been getting worse recently. The heroine couldn't figure out how His Majesty endured it all. For 3 years, it must have been incredibly difficult. The king fainted again from clinging to the amulet's energy. He had pushed himself to the limit. The heroine asked Jade to spar more with His Majesty, just like last time, but the captain hesitated, saying the king tended to go berserk whenever he picked up a weapon. Even if Jade was telling the truth, Hailey couldn't be sure that banning weapons was a good idea. She had discovered this after hugging the king a few times. His natural charisma as a leader was irresistible. Roderick possessed the aura of a divine emperor, something purely lethal. If he hadn't tried to control every outburst, the heroine certainly wouldn't have been able to restrain him. Jade was surprised when the queen told him to take her husband to Arthur Forest more often for some fresh air. The captain reminded them that the place was forbidden to everyone except members of the royal family. With her original memories merging with Hailey's, the girl's mind was now a mess, and she had completely forgotten about that. Finally, the heroine returned to her room and slept for a whole day. She had collapsed straight onto the bed yesterday. Today, even meditation felt strenuous. The bracelet was still intact, but recent events had taken a toll on it. Hailey thought His Majesty would leave her alone for a while, so she was taking it easy today, but the opposite happened. The moment the king walked in, Hailey thought her father was spouting nonsense again. Roderick complained, "Do I need a reason to visit my wife's room?" It seemed he was just dropping by like a regular patient at a clinic. The heroine smiled and reminded him that he once didn't even want a gift from his beloved wife. As a Duncan, Hailey never missed an opportunity for sarcasm. Since Roderick was here, he asked the queen to have the tea they couldn't finish yesterday. As the girl sipped her tea, the king was lost in thought. To her surprise, he asked her to come over and do the same thing she did in his office recently. The heroine did her best with her limited skills, while Roderick regarded it as a cat's playful pounce. He told the queen that he couldn't sleep again tonight, and her prayers from yesterday apparently didn't reach Roderick. It was probably because she was thinking of someone else, but Hailey still didn't understand why he had to ask, though it always sounded ridiculous to her. Roderick noticed she was wary, but didn't know why. She might be hiding something, but it didn't seem like Hailey wanted to harm him or the royal family. With a smile playing on his lips, Roderick asked the queen why she was suddenly pretending not to understand. This guy was too persistent, so the heroine decided to play along and sat next to him. Then she took his hand and began to massage it. As Roderick suspected, she didn't have that much muscle for someone who trained often. And her fingertips were soft, her skin thin, so the blisters from carving had appeared and healed in some places, which contradicted the queen's story about her hobby. Roderick suspected she had never done anything like this before coming to the palace, so the man didn't understand why she had to lie. The king wanted to call her out on it, but the moment he looked at the girl, his expression changed. Hailey was stunned when His Majesty asked if she was trying to seduce him. He turned his head and told the heroine that the ribbon on her dress in front of her was loose. The heroine's face instantly turned beet red. She had no idea how that happened. She was startled when the king told her to move her hands. Roderick skillfully took care of it. The king saw her face, flushed with shame and embarrassment, which was impossible to hide from others. The heroine snapped, "That was so inappropriate. You should have pretended you didn't see anything." But Roderick didn't want anyone else to be staring. The king said to either blame it on his own mistake. Hailey's face became flustered again, and the king immediately apologized. She didn't like this, but he pleaded with her not to hate him so much, because now he felt much better than before. The heroine muttered, "I feel much better than I did at the beginning, too." That girl really had a talent for playing with people's emotions. Hailey swore to herself that she would stop doing things that attracted attention, but she had a habit of falling back into her old ways. The next day, Jade appeared in the king's office. Roderick asked in a calm, tone if something had happened, and the man explained a report he had prepared. The captain of the First Night Order pointed out that the king's condition was starting to slowly improve. The woman who became the king's first bride died of poisoning. Before the second bride was poisoned, Roderick hadn't realized Duke Duncan was so obsessed with marrying into the royal family. Jade told the ruler that Hailey had a diary she brought from the duchy. The diary had about 10 chapters, and she hadn't written anything new since arriving at the palace, only opening it to look at it occasionally. The captain asked if he should check its contents. For some reason, Roderick just didn't want to do it, so he decided to let the queen keep it. At least the king didn't want to be the kind of man who snoops through his wife's old diary. Then Roderick suggested they end the talk about the Duncans and go get some exercise. The spirit asked the girl why she was pretending not to see him again. He happened to appear again just when Hailey had finally decided to take a break. The heroine pleaded with the spirit to stop talking to her because she just wanted to live a normal life. But for someone who said that, Hailey had a talent for getting into trouble. The ghost hit the nail on the head. The sword of the captain of the First Night Order was once again taken by the king. You just couldn't get close to Roderick. He complained to Jade, asking how he could be weaker than his own monarch, and the captain swore to train harder. The king was about to start another round when an indescribable feeling washed over him. He dropped his sword and bolted, somehow feeling that she was there. An image of Hailey immediately came to his mind, but if he went in that direction, it would be the garden by the lake. It was said that Hailey Duncan had tried to drown herself in the river, which was why Roderick had a bad feeling. Since this guardian spirit didn't seem to be helping Roderick, the heroine asked why. The ghost knelt and asked the girl if he should tell her of Roderick's sins, but of course, the spirit was just teasing her. He couldn't actually tell her, because it was a natural mystery that the heroine needed to solve on her own. Hailey sat down dejectedly, but her eyes lit up when the ghost said her name from her previous life. She hadn't mentioned her name at all, so she wondered how far this ghost could see. Since both Connie Che and the real Hailey had already died once, the heroine didn't need to be so afraid. He said it as if it didn't matter. The ghost pointed towards King Roderick, letting the heroine know her husband was coming. He wore a troubled expression and, once again, brought a large swarm of evil spirits with him. Hailey looked at the spirit in confusion as he suddenly stood up. He told the queen that he had taken care of the current king himself, so she could enjoy herself. This ghost was clearly powerful. He annihilated all the evil creatures in an instant. Roderick rushed over to Hailey excitedly and asked why she was here. He was probably worried because she was by the water now. Hailey replied with a warm smile that she was just out for some air and hadn't thought about jumping into the lake at all. But Roderick suddenly gave her a suspicious look and sat down next to her. He saw the drawing on the ground and asked if Hailey had been doodling just now. He made a cute expression, which brought a smile to the girl's face. Then Hailey suggested that if His Majesty was done with his training, they could take a walk in the forest together, as it was the perfect time for one. Hailey's teasing was more than he could handle. The heroine shivered when the king casually mentioned that she was different for what he had heard. She realized she needed to act more like Hailey Duncan to avoid suspicion, but it was just too much fun being around him right now. Roderick noticed her mood change and asked why she had gone silent again, and that if she had something to say, she should just go on and say it. Instead of answering, she told the king he should get regular checkups to stay healthy. Roderick grinned, stood up, and offered her his hand, inviting her for a walk in Arthur Forest. It was fun being with the king, but it could be dangerous if she got too attached. If she kept her distance, everything would be fine. She refused, but the king threatened to carry her there. In the end, the heroine agreed to go, but on her own terms. Arthur Forest was always filled with divine energy. If this guy kept coming here, his aura would get even stronger. No matter how hard Hailey tried, she probably couldn't even purify half of his energy. She was caught off guard when the king suddenly collapsed on her lap. After a few times, he found that he slept well this way, completely unaware of the real reason. Hailey complained to the king, "Do you really see me as your personal pillow?" Roderick smirked at the queen and said, "Then how about you be my blanket instead of a pillow?" He was well aware that this marriage was no pleasure for Hailey, but Roderick hoped their marriage could at least have moments like this. Although their relationship was far from normal, filled with all sorts of arguments and conflicts, the king still felt at home. This ideal was shattered when Roderick dropped the bombshell that the annual hunting competition was next month. They barely managed to cancel it last year, but this year it was mandatory. Unlike his animal-loving wife, his father-in-law's family was crazy and wouldn't let it be canceled. Seeing Hailey's reaction, he was convinced she was very fond of animals. Hailey decided to ask why last year's hunt was canceled if the king usually always went. It turned out the hunt was basically a social event, as not only the king's men participated, but also a large number of outside eyes were watching. Hailey immediately understood that he didn't want to be seen like that in front of people. The king immediately thought, could this girl have sensed his anxiety just by listening to his story? But she was the type who always hid things, so how could she care about him that much? Roderick had never admitted his madness to himself. He was afraid of becoming a full-blown mad king. However, something about this made him feel that perhaps telling everything would actually calm him down, especially to her, the daughter of his political enemy, who would immediately run to her father to tattle the moment he showed weakness. Even knowing all the risks, Roderick wanted to confess everything to her, and only to her. But the heroine covered his mouth with her hand. She replied in a sad voice, "It's really not. He's not mad, nor is he broken." The heroine was very sure of this. A person with such clear and honest eyes couldn't be like that. A few days later, another meeting was held, and the hunting competition was brought up again. Duke Duncan decided, like the most loyal hound, to ask if the king was feeling unwell. Roderick still couldn't figure out how such a rotten person could have a daughter as perfect as her. He never understood why he had to see a shadow of that scum in his own wife. Roderick raised his hand and had Jade pass over the document. He had one to give to his father-in-law as well. It turned out to be an anonymous complaint about the discrepancy between the actual income of the duchy and the taxes he paid. Now the royal family could launch an investigation and dig deeper into the matter. Roderick requested another chance to respond to those words, hoping Duke Duncan himself would stop tarnishing the queen's reputation. The king was giving his father-in-law only one chance to mend his ways before a formal audit. Roderick also added that the hunting competition would be held as planned next month. He left, and Duke Duncan struggled to suppress the rage born of frustration. Late at night, the heroine sat in her room, carving another amulet for his majesty with a small knife. As soon as she finished, Roderick, who had been lying on her bed, suggested she lie down next to him. Ever since their last visit to Arthur Forest, the king had been napping in Hailey's room whenever he got the chance. Besides, it was the cleanest room in the castle. Without waiting for her answer, Roderick got up from the bed and walked towards the heroine. She froze when he effortlessly lifted her into his arms. Then he placed her on the bed and said that if she felt uncomfortable with him, she should sleep on the sofa. But for someone who had just found a comfortable spot, it might feel a bit awkward to make someone else sleep there. So the girl told him to sleep on the bed. The king acted as if he had been waiting for this opportunity and immediately climbed in next to her. He admitted that he was genuinely glad his wife wasn't heartless enough to make him sleep on the sofa. Suddenly, Roderick leaned over her and asked if Hailey knew what she needed to do once they started sharing a bed. He slyly smiled and suggested they do it properly. Then Hailey blushed furiously, her heart pounding like a drum. Roderick noticed she had frozen. Unable to move or speak, he lay back down and muttered that it was just his usual joke and she didn't have to struggle to say no. In fact, Hailey wanted to do it too, but for some reason, she just couldn't say it. Even though when it came to dealing with ghosts, she was the real expert. Roderick knew she needed to be mentally prepared. After all, she had once loved someone so deeply that she was willing to drown herself for him. And come to think of it, he was also in the competition, Sir Lawrence. The next day, the king read a report about his wife's lover, a name he had heard before. This was all because Lawrence was a renowned knight in the kingdom. Before marrying Hailey, the king had never given him much thought. There was also a premarital investigation report on Hailey on the table, so Roderick decided to read it again. As the king reviewed the queen's report again, he realized that nothing added up from beginning to end. It was then that he started to fly into a rage at Jade for his careless work. The king ordered everything to be checked from scratch and a new report to be ready before the competition ended. Roderick didn't understand why this bothered him so much, but he figured it had to do with his suspicions about Hailey. Now the girl was wandering by the lake alone, so the king gave Jade strict orders to keep an eye on the queen. A few days later, the heroine was preparing to make a big move. The spirit behind her suddenly asked what she was staring at, which startled her. It turned out she was actually looking for him. She wanted him to look after the king during the competition and help if anything happened. But the ghost couldn't grant this request. It was absurd for a human to ask a spirit to make a deal. If this castle were crawling with monsters, they would have torn the heroine to shreds long ago and ruined her life. Hailey agreed, but she knew her own power wasn't enough to accomplish this. She tried sewing handkerchiefs instead of amulets, but it was no use. The spirits could still get through. There was no way around it. Her power was too weak. She had to make multiple amulets. She poured all her soul and wishes into them. The heroine stayed up all night, praying constantly, just to give the amulets even a sliver of power. Just as she was leaving, the spirit told her to enjoy her life and seize the moment. But it was no use. The hunting competition was just hours away, so she had to keep making those handkerchiefs. The moment she stood up, she felt dizzy. Over the past few days, she had exhausted every ounce of her energy, and now she was completely drained. The problem was, the heroine had told Deborah not to follow her, which meant she was here alone now. Her strength finally gave out, and she fainted. The king retorted, "This is practically a protest against me." The heroine tried to explain again that she didn't mean it that way. Jade had found her unconscious and carried her to this room. Roderick, clearly displeased, asked how many times this had happened since she came to the palace. Hailey laughed, though the answer was simply to count how many times the king had gone mad. He began to play with her hair and asked, "Can't you just say you're having a hard time?" He was well aware that this marriage was pure hell for her. But Hailey immediately retorted that it wasn't like that at all. She had simply decided to accept her fate and go with the flow. But the king didn't believe her, so he asked Hailey to say his name. Hailey fidgeted but replied, "It's Roderick Ferris Blake." She knew all this, yet for some reason, she had never called him by his name. Hailey's eyes widened when the king gave her permission to call him Rod or Roderick. She thanked him for the honor, but refused, saying she would continue to address him by his title. Roderick didn't understand what was happening, and the girl hiding under the blanket explained that they needed more distance. He immediately asked if this was some kind of Duncan tactic, to provoke someone with a single sentence. Hailey burst out laughing, and that girl definitely had the king's attention. Every time she tried to keep her distance, the king would get irritated, but the moment she laughed, his mood would instantly improve. After calming down, Hailey decided to ask His Majesty if he was really going to the hunting competition. He was a bit surprised the girl was still fretting over it, probably because of her love for animals. Roderick was completely unprepared for the queen to suggest breaking at least one arm to cancel everything, or at least a leg, which made the man laugh out loud. With Hailey's slender wrists, she couldn't even break a single finger. The heroine realized that, in the end, there was no other way but to rely on the handkerchiefs. Hearing this, the king immediately asked if she was really planning to give him a handkerchief at the upcoming hunting competition. Hailey asked in surprise if he really thought she was lying, but she didn't understand why the king would want her handkerchief, which was completely useless. Roderick ruffled her hair again and said she was just trying to say she didn't want to give the handkerchief. He told the girl that conversation had hurt him emotionally. The heroine promised she would give the handkerchief, so His Majesty shouldn't doubt her. Roderick wondered to himself if he should doubt that she would give the handkerchief or doubt that she was hiding something. Hailey leaped out of bed and exclaimed that it wasn't a lie. She pointed to the pile of handkerchiefs. Roderick had thought she was just being emotionally cautious, but now it seemed she had decided to give her heart to someone else. The guy felt the queen's health was deteriorating because she was constantly making these kerchiefs. If you were to look at her hands, you would see they were covered in scratches. He would get upset when she kept her distance, but when she smiled, Roderick's heart would warm up all over again. He disliked that she was risking her health for these plain old kerchiefs, but the sentiment of her trying to keep her promise was still nice. He moved closer to her once again, telling her to get some rest, as her face had gone completely pale. He solemnly offered his arm to her as a pillow. Hailey had never encountered such a situation, so she was unsure if she should accept it. Roderick told her to come a little closer. The lanyard on her wrist was cutting off his blood circulation. Despite it being incredibly awkward, she moved a bit closer to him. The king couldn't understand it at all. Sometimes she looked as if she carried all the loneliness and sorrow of the world. Perhaps her old father, Duncan, had been rough with her as she was growing up. He couldn't comprehend how anyone could lay a hand on such a small creature. When he dropped the bombshell that there was a problem between them, Hailey froze in an instant. Roderick just couldn't understand why she always gazed at that lake, as if she wanted to jump in. Hailey frantically asked him why he was so fixated on the matter. The king held her tightly, reminding her that she was his wife and shouldn't be asking such obvious questions. Even if one day Hailey had to pay a great price for this warmth, she would never stop. So, the problem lay with the king who had taken away the heroine's opportunity to play dumb. Hailey clearly had no intention of answering, so the man told her to hurry up and sleep. She was glad he was no longer pressing the issue. Time flew by, and the day of the hunting competition arrived. The handmaidens dressed Her Majesty the Queen, saying that once the king saw her in this attire, he would surely win the competition. But in reality, Hailey hoped he would finish last and not take any life. She took 3 of the best handkerchiefs, preparing to give them to His Majesty. Roderick thought Hailey was ready. Among the numerous contestants, the king quickly spotted Lawrence. Hailey's beloved kept looking around, as if searching for someone. Then the king noticed Hailey. Roderick smiled, thinking that she was so petite, it must be difficult for her to live in this world. The heroine handed him the 3 handkerchiefs, explaining that it would be best to carry them during the competition. The king accepted the gift, and Hailey found it cute how he clumsily handled the gift with his large hands, his cheeks turning red. Roderick asked the girl what he should hunt for her. Just as Hailey was about to protest, the king interrupted her, saying that no fool goes hunting only to return empty-handed. Lawrence saw Hailey and hurried over. The king guessed that his wife did not want him to win this competition, which was essentially a race. Hailey wanted to tell her husband to tone it down and not take things so seriously, but she said nothing because Roderick was now the king. So Hailey could only urge him not to get hurt and to return safely. The king heard a commotion behind him and turned around. He saw Lawrence making his way through the crowd toward them. The moment Hailey saw her true love, tears welled up in her eyes as memories came flooding back. She began to plead with herself to stop. The queen crying over her former lover brought shame upon King Roderick. The man immediately jumped down from his horse and instantly embraced Hailey, worriedly asking if she was all right. The tears just wouldn't stop, so the heroine began to apologize to the king for her mistake. But Roderick didn't understand why she was crying and acting as guilty as if she had committed an unforgivable sin. Hailey smiled when the man praised her for her quick and clever reaction, hiding fast enough that most people didn't see her tears. The crowd began to assume the queen was crying out of longing from not having seen the king for a few days. Roderick told Hailey to lift her head and pretend that nothing had happened. He suggested creating a bigger scene to divert the crowd's attention and cover up this whole mess. The king's lips slowly moved closer to the girls. This was all Roderick's and Duke Duncan's fault, and the king was about to admit it. He smiled and asked if he could count on their help, though he knew in his heart it was just a cover-up. In that moment, the heroine closed her eyes. Their lips touched gently. The whole thing lasted only a few seconds, and when Roderick finally mumbled and pulled away, he admitted it had just been an excuse from the start. It was simply because he wanted to. His mission was accomplished, so the king told the girl to go back and stay safe. All this time, Lawrence had been watching our heroes. Although His Majesty said everything was fine, it was really to cover for her. The heroine was grateful, so she decided to catch up to him. As soon as Roderick stopped, the girl offered him her bracelet. The man smiled, asking if she was really going to give him something she treasured so much, leaving herself with nothing. However, Hailey told His Majesty that he must return the piece of jewelry as soon as he got back. There was nothing she could do about it now. Roderick chuckled softly, thanking his wife for lending him something so precious to her. His gaze fell upon Hailey's beautiful lips once more, and a strong urge to kiss her again rose within him. But he managed to suppress the urge and walked toward his knights. Watching his retreating back, the heroine began to pray to the gods for his safe return. As night fell, they decided to make camp. Roderick glared at Lawrence, irritably asking Jade if he should just put the guy down. Duke Duncan had likely planned for his daughter to become queen from the moment she was born, so it was impossible for her to have ever dreamed of another man. The report stated that Lawrence was the one who broke up with Hailey, which, for some reason, greatly irritated the current king. Yi-jae believed it was because he felt pressured when rumors of the state marriage began to circulate, and they could no longer maintain their secret relationship. So Lawrence decided to initiate the breakup at an opportune moment. The king remembered Hailey's expression. It looked like things were not over yet. Roderick decided to have Jade hunt in his stead. Now he had to catch more prey than Albert Duncan to prevent the Duke from bringing up his son. On top of that, Jade also had to catch more than Kian's strongest swordsman, Lawrence. The king glanced at the sky, wondering what she was doing now. At dawn the next day, the heroine decided to show a little respect to King Roderick. She silently recited the correct words in her mind, and everything went much more smoothly than the last time. The heroine was certain her grandmother would be proud of her. Now that the meditation was over, the next step was to throw away this note. On it was a list of 5 to-do items that had been nagging at her. The 5th day of the hunting competition was in full swing. Jade was giving it his all, while the King of Kian was simply lying lazily under a tree. But during this time, Roderick had been carefully examining the Queen's treasures and noticed that the patterns on the bracelet and the kerchief were nearly identical. He turned around immediately when a knight reported that a squirrel had fallen into their trap. Squirrel fur had recently become popular for decorating cloaks, so they might as well count this one as a prize. But this was no ordinary squirrel. Roderick couldn't tell if it was beckoning him over or warning him to stay away. Was it in sorrow, or was it unharmed? Jade glared at the king when he ordered him to make a cage for the squirrel. They decided to send the little fellow directly to the queen. Roderick was already imagining Hailey's smile and reminded himself again that there were only 2 days left according to the diary. The heroine learned that Lawrence had told the real Hailey not to run away, but to go and form new relationships. He promised he would become the queen's knight so they could always be together. But the Duke's daughter knew that wouldn't work now. If Hailey's soul was still lingering here, the heroine wanted to appease it and help it find peace. So the 6th item on her list was to visit the place where Hailey had jumped. As she read further in the diary, the girl learned that her father was about to do something terrible, and Hailey had wanted to stop him. But she didn't want to receive another slap. According to the diary, it was clear that Hailey had tried to understand the Duke's cues, as she was a kind-hearted child. Both heroines had been very unlucky with their parents. From the last page of the diary, it was apparent that she had stopped writing recently, a month before she passed away. The heroine remembered Hailey's childhood clearly. On second thought, she remembered a lot about her childhood, but her memories of recent years were very hazy. The king praised his captain for defeating that idiot Duncan and the arrogant turkey, Lawrence. In the end, His Majesty didn't have a single fit. Suddenly, the small animal in the cage began to shriek loudly. The king turned, ordered all his soldiers to spread out, and then threw his sword. It turned out a venomous snake had been approaching, but Roderick managed to save his subordinate. Its bite was so venomous it could even kill a horse. The king praised the little creature for giving a warning. They prepared to set off again because Hailey was already waiting. The men would soon reach the forest entrance. The ceremony was in the evening, so they let their horses rest. Roderick's eyes widened as soon as he saw a familiar figure. Right at the forest's exit, his horse immediately galloped toward her. The heroine greeted His Majesty with a radiant smile on her face. Roderick swept Hailey into his arms, spinning her around happily to congratulate him on his return. Hailey was overjoyed that he had come back safe and sound. Her efforts had not been in vain after all. Later, Roderick handed her the groundhog. Hailey didn't understand why he would bring back a wild animal that was living perfectly well in the wild. The little creature had been doomed to die, but encountered a nobleman who saved its life. The groundhog went straight to the heroine. It immediately bit everyone else, but was friendly to Hailey. Perhaps her scent calmed it. Roderick returned her bracelet. Noticing Hailey's happy smile, the king joked that she loved the bracelet more than him. Suddenly, the heroine saw the vengeful spirit of the snake right in front of her. Hailey was instantly struck with fear and froze. In a trembling voice, she asked the king if he had accidentally killed that snake during the competition. He nodded. Hailey took a deep breath and replied that he shouldn't have killed it. Snakes are very vengeful, and, unlike other ghosts, they remember the one who killed them. But the bigger problem was that Hailey was terrified of them. Hailey covered covered her face to avoid seeing the ghost and pitifully asked the king why he couldn't have just gone around it. Although she rationally knew it was unavoidable and that she had to hold on with her willpower, she couldn't force herself to face it. Cursing how much she hated it, she ran away from the king in shock. Roderick didn't even realize if the girl was referring to him or the snake. The hunting competition ended, and as expected, Jade was victorious, bringing glory to King Roderick. The squirrel Roderick had brought back made its home by the castle lake. Peaceful days seemed to have arrived, but Hailey's anxiety only grew worse. Days went by, and Hailey couldn't leave her room, terrified of running into that disgusting thing. Consequently, she hadn't seen the king in 4 days. Unexpectedly, Jade knocked on the queen's door, requesting permission to enter. The moment the door to the room opened, Hailey froze. Roderick's eyes shot open. What on earth was he doing lying here? He was supposed to be working in his office. Damn it. He blinked at Hailey as realization dawned. He was lying on her lap. Time flashed back to 4 days ago, the moment the hunting competition had just ended. Roderick felt that the queen hated him. Good heavens, that kind of emotional trauma never truly disappears. Jade dispelled the gloom, urging him to go and confront the queen directly. To be honest, after seeing her cry over some other man, Roderick had no idea what to do. As he had already said, this whole mess was his and Duke Duncan's fault. They didn't force her, but as the days passed, the king's mental state continued to worsen. He hadn't slept a wink and was now on the verge of a breakdown. Roderick heard the voices again, whispering for him to go kill something. Jade didn't know why, but he could tell that the queen was able to calm the king. However, the guy remained stubborn. Suddenly, Roderick slammed his head on the table, cursing. Perhaps the king was resisting because of the matter between the queen and Sir Lawrence. But Jade couldn't bear to watch any longer, and just like that, the king ended up in the heroine's room. Roderick found himself thinking that the air in here felt completely different, and the damned voices in his head had finally shut up. He complained to her, reminding her that he couldn't sleep without her. The heroine admitted that she had wanted to see him too, and had been a little nervous about it. Like a pouting child, Roderick begged her to at least come see him once in a while. Roderick's room was the first item on her to-do list, so the heroine had no choice but to sneak in. The king was surprised to feel his body actually become lighter. Yeah, most people say mystical magic is just a fairy tale, but the royal archives say otherwise. Roderick asked if she had studied medicine, and Hailey replied with a warm smile that she had not. Roderick told her that when he was with her, his mind stopped buzzing and became clear. Although the heroine wanted to tell him everything, fear got the better of her. She didn't want others to look at her strangely, so she told the king that he could use her for anything he needed. Roderick grabbed her hand and suggested kissing her. He didn't expect Hailey to lean in on her own and peck him on the cheek. Just then, the king jumped up in a fluster and snapped, "Are you a siren?" He pulled her in close, saying, "Let's try that kiss again. I need to confirm something." From a moment Hailey started crying, Roderick had been dying to kiss her, so he needed to confirm a few things. The king couldn't resist. He pushed her down onto the bed, and she gently wrapped her arms around him. Roderick deliberately interlocked their fingers so his hands wouldn't wander, no matter how hard he tried to stop them. This kiss was different. Something in it made the heroine feel a sense of desperation. In any case, it was all too obvious. When they were both out of breath, the king gently pulled away. He had proven his theory correct. This girl had become special to him. He hadn't realized his heart had grown so large. Suddenly, the man decided to ask Hailey how much she loved Lawrence. Just hearing the name weighed heavily on the heroine's heart. It seemed the real Hailey still felt pain at the sound of his name. The girl answered the king. Roderick decided not to rush things and to let Hailey sort everything out and then completely forget about Lawrence. Instead, he offered his arm as a pillow for her. The king made up this excuse so she would come closer and they could cuddle. Hailey knew exactly what King Roderick was trying to do, close the distance between them. But the closer he got, the worse her situation became. If he were to hate her, she wasn't sure she could bear it. But there was no point in bringing it up. Roderick was not at fault. He was just too kind. The king pulled her tighter, knowing that she now had a permanent place in his heart. And so they fell asleep. Sometime late at night, the heroine woke with a start, feeling that something was wrong. She flinched when she saw the angry ghost outside the window. The protagonist jumped out of bed to deal with it. It was the ghost of a drunkard who was still begging for more alcohol even after Hailey politely asked him to leave. So she snapped icily, cut the crap. She was ready to give him an ultimatum. If he kept clinging to that person, she would just destroy him. The ghost vanished. Hailey collapsed to her knees, exhausted. To solve the real problem, she needed either enlightenment or destruction. Fighting ghosts was just too tiring. Still, Hailey wanted to give that person a peaceful night. Everyone deserved that. It was time to deal with him. So the heroine rushed to the painting and began tearing off all the talismans stuck underneath. The little ghost immediately started to roar. If that barrier fell, those evil spirits would surely break in again. There was no running away from this. So now Hailey was determined to stand her ground. As soon as the defense was down, a vicious snake spirit slithered out from behind the door. It was much bigger than the heroine had anticipated. The little ghost immediately realized Hailey couldn't handle this thing alone. So he jumped out to help. The heroine was stunned as the child lunged at the giant snake's head, but she immediately felt the ghost's power fading, so she didn't waste any time. Hailey quickly performed a purification ritual, asking the creature to forget the pains of this world and return to where it belonged. Thanks to her little friend's help, Hailey succeeded, but she swore never to kill a snake again. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the bed and invited the little ghost to take a nap with her. The next morning, the king finally woke up after a deep sleep, but he noticed Hailey was pale and asked if she had a nightmare. The girl was definitely sleeping on the other side last night, so Roderick guessed he must have rolled her over in his sleep. I hope it was really just a dream. The guy immediately asked Hailey if she really disliked kissing, but instead of answering, she pleaded with him to never kill a snake again, if possible. After all, they had Jade to handle any problems. For some reason, the captain of the first squad felt like he had just been handed another annoying task. Roddy promised to grant her request, and the heroine thanked him for listening. During the reign of the fourth king, a letter was left for future rulers, warning them about the mystical powers of the three great families. At the next meeting, Duke Duncan once again requested His Majesty to restore his son's position on the western border. Roddy chuckled softly, asking if they were talking about the guy who couldn't even catch half a beast during the competition. So Duke Duncan decided to tell the king that he had tried to discuss the matter with the queen several times, but was repeatedly refused. But Roddy warned Hailey's father not to spread rumors about the queen. He hadn't forced her to forbid anything, so there was no need to complain publicly now. As soon as the meeting ended, Roddy wondered how a father could know his own daughter so poorly. Then his gaze fell on Hailey. Unlike her relatives, this girl was vastly different from all the Duncans. The heroine's eyes lit up when she saw the king walking straight toward her. Roderick wanted to know what the queen was carving. This time the heroine said it was the same thing she had given him last time. He remembered the strange little statues he had just received, which were new but already badly damaged. So he decided to find a better tree for Hailey so she could play for as long as she wanted. Roderick said he felt stressed during the meeting and came down to relax. The heroine immediately realized her father had caused some trouble again today. The king guessed she disliked the Duncan family and wondered why the Duke was so eager to see her. Unexpectedly, Hailey said she would meet the Duke and would do whatever His Majesty wanted her to do. When asked why, she replied that the king could use her for any purpose, which infuriated him. Roderick asked coldly if he had been so cold to her that she would use such words. Apparently, the word used made him very uncomfortable. The girl's face fell when she realized the king had finally had enough of her. Seeing this, he sighed deeply. The thought crossed his mind that when she remained silent, it only made things harder for him. The king called a halt to the little squabble because he regretted everything. Then he gently ran his fingers over her, pulled her closer, and kissed her. Hailey parted her lips slightly, and the king's tongue immediately traced her lower lip. Lately, it had become very important to him to please not just her body, but her soul as well. So he pouted and asked, "Are you okay?" The heroine blushed, "I'm fine, and I liked it." Roderick apologized. He was the one who brought up the Duke in the first place. But then he unexpectedly asked his dear wife if she would kiss him multiple times a day, at least once if she liked it. Hailey decided to pretend she hadn't heard anything. In moments like these, she looked so innocent, even if the ice in her heart wouldn't melt. The deeper Jade delved into the case, the more questions he had. Now he had no choice but to ask for that person's cooperation. At the commander's behest, Lawrence came to his office to answer some questions about the queen. Soon, the king discovered that Lawrence Irwin had also looked into the report on the queen. The commander of the first night watch explained that it was to carry out the king's order. Now the report revealed many details, and after a full verification, the scope of the investigation had become even larger. But the content was not much different from before. Everyone around Hailey, even her long-lost childhood friends, gave the same testimony about her. Even Sir Lawrence was confused by their doubts about the report, but Roderick was still displeased that Hailey's boyfriend was involved in the case. From the report, he found that the girl would order at least one new set of clothes every week and was always humming a little tune. The king decided to ask Jade if he truly believed their queen was involved. Just then, the heroine was sitting by the lake. A ghost emerged from the water with a cunning smile and asked if she was waiting for him today. Hailey silently pointed to the person standing behind her. Although she had asked to be left alone after fainting last time, the king would not allow it to happen again. The heroine decided to ask the ghost if he really wasn't going to help, as she felt she couldn't handle it alone and would most likely just die. First, the ghost suggested she give up what she was doing, but Hailey refused. Then, the ghost noticed that her opinion of the king had indeed improved. So far, she had handled it well, so maybe she could keep pushing herself. The heroine was about to respond, but the man vanished in an instant. Suddenly, Roderick appeared beside her and asked if she had decided to protest against him. If she wanted him to fill this lake with dirt, she could keep coming here. But honestly, he was panicked because he thought she had returned to the lake again. At least she seemed fine, though. If only he could ask those damn questions on the spot. Hailey would push him further away, which was something the king definitely did not want. He sat down beside her and asked her to sing. Hailey immediately refused, claiming she couldn't sing to save her life. Roderick decided to take his next round of anger out on Jade's stupid report. Then, he caressed her cheek and suggested a kiss. But this time, she had to be the one to initiate it. The heroine didn't resist and leaned in first. Then she slowly pulled back with a happy smile. The king invited her to dinner, and the heroine, of course, accepted. Her annoying list had failed once again. But she decided to try again and asked the king if she could see his bedroom tonight. As soon as the words left her mouth, the man turned as red as a beetroot. The king felt it was best to ask a question, just to be safe. Sensing the wrong atmosphere, the heroine shrieked that it was not at all what he was thinking. Roderick understood and told Hailey she didn't have to ask for permission every time. If the ghost wouldn't help, she had no choice but to start with the king's bedroom. As night fell, she trudged all the way there with heavy steps. The place gave off an extremely eerie vibe, and the heroine really did not want to go inside. But turning back was impossible, as she had brought a whole bunch of talismans with her. Roderick couldn't believe this silly child was actually searching his room. The hero scooped her up and teased, "If I prepare snacks, will you come more often?" Then Roderick pinned her to the bed, begging his wife for a little attention. The heroine blushed again, fumbling to put some distance between herself and the king. She saw 2 talismans on the nightstand, which she had given him a long time ago. Time had clearly left its mark on them, turning them black. These small figurines now proved that the king's situation was indeed very cruel. The heroine vowed to make new ones soon. These could break at any moment and could just be thrown away. Hailey decided to ask His Majesty if he had ever committed a grave sin in his life. This situation couldn't be explained unless one had committed a sin grave enough to incur such a punishment. The man replied that not many who ascended the throne would deny it. The heroine admitted she was no saint either. Roderick laughed, finding her words baffling. Hailey told him that she was once furious with someone, and now she blamed him for all her troubles. Perhaps that person had his reasons, but the heroine refused to care. One day, she felt compassion for others again, but it only made her feel more lonely. She had no choice but to sort out her feelings internally. It wasn't worth carrying bad karma. She came to her senses and quickly apologized for rambling on about boring things for too long. At that moment, however, Roderick felt as if someone had slipped into his heart, only to disappear a moment later. He picked up the small figurines and suggested naming them both. For a moment, the man caught a glimpse of the girl's true self, which made him very happy. The heroine decided to name one of the talismans after Hailey. In her mind, she named the second one Yi-jae. Now, even if the figurine named Hailey broke, Roderick wouldn't be able to throw it away. He had said the name Hailey, not Yi-jae. The heroine didn't even realize what had happened, as she had never thought about it before. Seeing the young girl's sad expression, the king wondered if he had just said something wrong. She kept wearing that sad expression, making Roderick constantly doubt himself. The man decided to change the subject and asked when she planned to fulfill her promise. When the king suggested negotiating, the heroine smiled, which brought a warm smile to Roderick's face. He grabbed the heroine's hands and held them above her head. Hailey started to think it was some kind of joke and kicked her husband. The king sat down beside her and admitted that even in this room, he could fall asleep instantly. The warmth that permeated her body and soul was payment enough for what she was about to do tonight. As soon as the man fell asleep, the heroine cast a spell on him. She couldn't risk him waking up in the middle of it. Then she walked to the center of the room and called for all things wanting to vent their deep-seated hatred to line up first, but nothing appeared. Evil spirits always target weaknesses, so it was best to avoid them. She had to hide her fear and keep her spirit unshakable. Suddenly, the heroine remembered the talismans on the nightstand. She rushed over and grabbed them. Her husband's voice immediately echoed in her mind, how he had refused to throw away the gift named after her. So she left one of the figurines where it was. Although she doubted she could defeat such a powerful evil spirit, she decided to give it her all. The ghost started shouting, calling her a witch. But she was the very guardian who protected the king every night, so she would do everything possible to complete her mission. She succeeded in defeating it. It was a tough battle, but she couldn't do it twice in one night, so she planned to deal with the rest later. Now, that pendant had become even more terrifying. They shared the same name and suffered in the same way, which made the girl smile bitterly, but her heart felt heavy for some reason. The next morning came. As soon as Roderick woke up, he reconfirmed that as long as the queen was by his side, he could fall asleep anywhere. Looking at the small figurine, he wondered if it had really worn out so much in just a few days. King Roderick developed a new habit of sleeping in Hailey's room. After spending a night in the king's room, the heroine realized something new. He lived in a place like that without any preparation or protection, so it was safe to say he had incredible willpower. But Hailey didn't want to leave him alone in that room and started begging him to sleep with her every day. The king kept trying to get closer to Hailey, refusing to let go of his embrace, completely unaware of everything. But with each time, she grew more doubtful if she could afford such a luxury. In a relationship, honesty is crucial, but Hailey was hiding too much. One day, she was walking by the lake again. The strange ghost hadn't appeared since then, and the heroine began to wonder for no reason if she had been too aggressive. She saw Lawrence right in front of her. As the man rushed towards her, the real Hailey's emotions began to stir again. The protagonist realized she had to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The knight bowed, apologizing for his rudeness to Her Majesty, but he begged the queen to let him speak with her. At least once. She finally agreed, and they were left alone. Lawrence had only one question to ask. The protagonist immediately noticed his eyes were filled with sincerity and anxiety. But those emotions should have been directed at the real Hailey, not her. Lawrence had heard about the accident the day before the wedding that almost killed her. He wanted to know if it was because of him. The man couldn't understand why she would do something so terrible when he had already made a promise. Lawrence wanted to be with her as a knight, but the protagonist told him not to. Everything between them was long over. If Lawrence couldn't let go of his hope, Hailey wouldn't be able to rest in peace either. The blonde man asked in confusion why she was crying now. Once again, the heroine hadn't noticed. Driven by her true emotions, she ran away. She knew she could never have a love like that, but for some reason, the girl longed to leave behind someone so precious. As usual, the king knew the heroine had cried today. Roderick asked irritably if she was still planning to cheat on him with her ex, but the heroine said that was ridiculous. Somehow this drove the king absolutely mad. He couldn't understand how much she must love that bastard to cry so easily just by looking at his face. But it was just a simple misunderstanding. Hailey reminded the king that he had promised not to rush her. Roderick replied that he was just asking her not to go there. However, the king had said before that he wouldn't mind. Roderick narrowed his eyes and asked if the situation then was the same as it was now. Now, he asked the girl if her feelings were still the same as they were then. Seeing his serious and stern expression, the heroine couldn't help but laugh. She apologized to Roderick and confessed that she didn't want to see that person at all. The man pulled her cheek and told her to stop making that face. Otherwise, Roderick might start getting wild ideas. After the protagonist finished lunch, the king told the girl he wanted to sleep in her room tonight. But Hailey still had to deal with another monster, so she suggested Roderick sleep in her room while she slept in his. If they were separate, there would be no risk of him waking up in the process. The king asked, with a hint of hurt, if she thought this was a punishment for what he had said earlier. He really couldn't sleep without her, and whenever she said things like that, her heart would pound in her chest. Roderick wanted to sleep together, but if she really hated the idea, they could call it a punishment for his betrayal. Hailey smiled warmly and said that a punishment wouldn't be this comfortable. The man took a deep breath and asked if she was doing it on purpose. The heroine froze as he pushed her against the nearest wall. She didn't expect him to try and kiss her right there in the castle hallway, but Hailey immediately kissed him back, the kind of kiss that always made her heart race. A few minutes passed, and the girl started to feel like he was about to swallow her whole. Just as she was starting to suffocate, the king loosened his grip slightly. Then he suddenly turned her around, pressing her back against his chest, and pushed her towards her room door. She was right. They needed to sleep in separate beds tonight. Roderick was about to lose his mind. Then the man hurried away. Hailey had to exorcise the ghost in His Majesty's chambers. But today, nothing was going right from the start. Soon, word spread that Her Majesty the Queen had granted an audience. Most of the time, she would smile and say she would pass on all of the king's suggestions to him. Deborah told the queen that if she didn't like something, she could fly into a rage without warning. A man walked into the throne room and blurted out that it had been difficult to see her lately. Duke Duncan apologized for not making an appointment in advance. The handmaiden whispered that he had arrived suddenly, saying he needed to speak with Her Majesty. Despite this, Hailey wanted to see him at least once. Her father immediately asked when she planned to bring people over from the family domain. The heroine replied that she didn't need to. Then the Duke requested that the king finally restore her brother's position, but Hailey simply said that you should handle it yourself. The Duke gritted his teeth to suppress his anger and requested a private conversation. Deborah shot a warning glance, signaling that they shouldn't do it, but Her Majesty agreed and told everyone in the room to leave them alone. Eventually, all uninvolved people left the throne room. Albert roared, "What the hell do you think you're doing now?" She was completely indifferent to this family on the verge of collapse. Duke Duncan was not her father, so he was wasting his breath now. No one knew that the real Hailey was dead, and she would be unhappy if the heroine didn't get angry on her behalf at least once. So the girl reminded the Duke, "I never asked to be queen." But in the end, it was he who had ruined his own daughter's life. Albert screamed, "You will regret this. If the family falls, don't think you'll get away unscathed." Hailey said in a calm voice, asking her father to at least stop doing evil for now. The Duke left the throne room without another word. Soon, the king found out that his queen was putting on her usual drama again today. The heroine reminded everyone that she had long said she had an untamable temper. Roderick asked how much she hated her father, and the girl said she just didn't want to deal with him. But now she seemed to be hiding her true feelings, so the king decided to admit that he found her really interesting. The heroine didn't expect such a confession and instantly turned bright red. Then the man wanted to show her something, so the protagonist had to climb the huge spiral staircase of the tower. Roderick remembered Hailey was obsessed with King Arthur. She had even borrowed the royal family's genealogical records to read. The first king believed that some kind of divine power protected the royal bloodline. This tower contained portraits of all the kings before him, so Roderick wanted to show Hailey. In the portrait of the founding king of Kian, the heroine recognized the man whose ghost had been haunting her. Hailey sat outside, staring into the distance, processing everything. It turned out the ghost was a king. Suddenly, he appeared before her, saying he was nearly 40 when he died. Hailey let out a scream, and the man said he had remained charming until the very end. He was still just as charming today, but the heroine couldn't figure out how he looked so young. At 40, the former king replied mysteriously that the beauty of being human is the ability to make one's own decisions. Those consumed by deep hatred become vengeful spirits, while those with great ideals break the rules. Hailey didn't know what his ideals were, but as a guardian spirit, he could at least lend a hand. But the dead are not allowed to interfere with the living. The first king warned the girl that at this rate, you'll be dead soon. The heroine shouted angrily, Don't you even care about your own descendant? The ghost's appearance changed, and he reminded the queen who she was talking to. An armed conflict had broken out on the western border. The knights managed to quell the conflict, and now the border was calm. The king reminded them harshly, I have long ordered to crush any forces trying to revive Damon. Now the commander had let his guard down, leading to a raid. Albert gave the king a cunning smile and suggested holding the commander of the Western Guard responsible. But Roderick told them not to worry. He would handle it properly after receiving the full report. In the end, the king ordered Jade to head west. The commander was not happy with this decision, as the king might fly off the handle again. But the thought of the queen calmed his nerves. During the reign of the fourth king, the three major families united the kingdom through marriage: Mellon, Rossell, and Duncan. The Duncan family's roots could be traced back to Damon, and Damon's forces were already stirring in the west. Coupled with the duke's sudden mention of his son, the former king suspected the Damon alliance was correct. The question was whether Duncan still possessed that kind of power. They had become Damon's nobility because of a unique power that had disappeared after the fifth king's reign. Roderick immediately ordered the queen to be brought before him. Even if she was unwilling, he could not entrust the West to Albert Duncan. The heroine brought the gift she had promised earlier. Although Roderick kept telling himself not to trust anyone from the Duncan family, he couldn't resist the girl's charm. Her creation almost made him breathless with laughter, and he begged her to continue filling the world with these strange things. Then the king suggested going to bed, but everything was wrong from the start. Roderick pushed Hailey onto the bed, and their lips immediately crashed together in a fiery, insatiable kiss. Hailey quickly regained her composure and pushed the king away. This was not what she had come for. In fact, she felt very ashamed. Roderick muttered, "Do you think I'm the one who should feel guilty?" He told Hailey to kiss him. As she leaned in, his gaze dropped, and her lips just barely brushed against his. She was in a hurry, but still careful. Roderick couldn't help but smirk. Hailey asked, "Hurt, are you laughing at me?" The king found it even more amusing. Hailey pouted and burrowed under the covers. "I'm going to sleep now." Roderick ruffled her hair, suppressing a laugh. "Don't be mad, okay?" At midnight, Roderick woke up. She wasn't beside him. He opened his eyes and saw her sitting in the middle of the room in just her nightgown. He immediately snapped, "What are you doing?" Hailey turned around in a panic. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to wake you." Hailey explained, "I was just meditating." But the man picked her up and told her to get some more sleep until morning. The heroine had messed up because she was sure she wouldn't wake him. But of course, things went wrong. She was just trying to help the soul of that child. The ghost was furious that no one could help him then, so now he was ready to torture everyone. Roderick didn't know how much longer he could pretend not to see Hailey's lies. The heroine's to-do list wasn't progressing, and what's worse, she had failed to exorcise the ghost yesterday. But what bothered her most now was going to the river where Hailey had jumped. The place must be near the capital shrine, but the heroine needed permission to leave the castle. So she decided to go talk to His Majesty. As she walked into the hallway, she bumped into the king, who smiled upon seeing her. Roderick said he wanted to have lunch with her, so until then, they could take a walk and talk. Actually, someone had come to the castle, and Roderick wanted to introduce him to his queen. She told him she wanted to ask for permission to go outside the castle. The man didn't mind at first, but his expression changed when she mentioned wanting to go to the shrine. He immediately snapped back, asking if she was really going to keep treating him like a fool. The king would absolutely not allow Hailey to go to the shrine. If she mentioned the shrine again, the king would have to fill that river and all the surrounding ones without hesitation. The heroine was about to explain, but Roderick cut her off, worried it would only make him angrier. Just then, a man appeared before them, someone Hailey had never seen before. The man looked exactly like the king, so the girl couldn't help but wonder who he was. Roderick told the queen, "This is my younger brother, Edgar." The brothers looked almost identical, but the heroine still couldn't recall if she had seen him before Hailey's death. At dinner, Edgar mentioned that his brother's incessant talk about Her Majesty the Queen made him angry enough to curse. But the truth was, Roderick complained nonstop because he was afraid someone else would get ahead of him and charm the queen. The protagonist blushed and asked the prince to continue eating, but he just chuckled and said, "Just call me Edgar." Hailey asked him what he did for fun, and the prince, almost beaming with joy, said, "To be honest, I just wander around doing research." She found herself jealous of his free spirit. This girl also wanted to see the world. The king pouted and said there was no need for her to make such an expression. if she really wanted to go, they could go together, and the king was even willing to make time for it. But Hailey wanted to go to the temple alone. She reminded him that she had promised not to do anything reckless, so she wouldn't get hurt. Edgar interjected, suggesting they each take a walk to clear their heads. As the prince handed her a plate, he said, "Don't make a scene at the dinner party." Hailey had no idea how he had arranged all of this. The king told her to eat quickly so she could grow up faster. 3 days later, when Prince Edgar was promoted to commander of the border, the nobles stopped their gossip. Roderick, as the king's representative, ordered his younger brother to defend the kingdom against the remnants of the Daemon forces. The original candidate for the position was Duke Duncan. Hailey told the king that their auras were completely different. Roderick explained that his younger brother was the smartest in the family, a bookworm since childhood. Hailey didn't understand why they would send a bookworm to the frontier, but she was more curious about why the king wanted to send his brother there, until the king turned the question back on her. Roderick said her hair color and other features indicated that her family originated from the Daemon Empire. In other words, Hailey's family were enemies of the king. Then, the king began to analyze each guest at the banquet and their respective worth. It was more like a lecture, but Hailey was confused why Roderick would reveal all this. After all, the Duncan family were his enemies. The king firmly believed she would never betray him. Our heroine's heart warmed instantly. She just wanted to stay by this amazing man's side forever. The day of the prince's farewell ceremony arrived. Roderick was sad about how things had turned out, but he promised his brother that once the situation stabilized, he could do what he loved. He wasn't sending Edgar to the west to die. In case something happened to him, his brother could step up and take over the country. The heroine's eyes widened when she heard this. If the king thought something might happen to him, Hailey had no idea what to do. That night, when she entered His Majesty the King's bedroom, fear made her freeze. Everything was back to how it was. The king's room was once again filled with evil spirits. The heroine fell to her knees, completely baffled as to why the amulets were useless. All of this had been for nothing, and Hailey's mind and body were on the verge of collapse. Roderick was frightened by the girl's state and immediately offered to call a doctor. Then, he saw the broken figurine and was stunned, while Hailey's tears continued to fall. The king realized he had messed up and immediately began to apologize. Roderick promised that even if they were all reduced to ashes, he would treasure them as long as she stopped crying. But when Hailey realized that the one on the floor was the figurine they had named Aika, she cried even harder. Despair completely consumed her. Roderick snatched the pieces and frantically promised they would treasure them, that appearances didn't matter, that he should treasure them. Hailey supported herself and stood up, and the king nervously asked if she was really okay. He begged her to explain and swore he would not harm her. Hailey forced a smile and said she was just tired, suggesting they go to bed, but it was a complete lie that anyone could see through. At some point, waiting for King Roderick to fall asleep had become an all-out battle. Of course, no one could sleep after seeing such a sight, but the protagonist had to endure it almost every day. She didn't understand how this person could be treated like that until she was exhausted. The protagonist was determined to fight until the very end. The Yamra figurine was still intact. Hailey would not fight empty-handed. The protagonist had always wanted to follow where her feet and heart desired. But deep down, she was always a lonely wanderer trekking through empty, desolate lands. A person's heart does not waver, and Hailey was determined to protect the king. Even knowing all the risks, the protagonist could do nothing. Her heart still ached for him, and the young woman could not resist. One should never bow to darkness, and the heroine had no intention of doing so. As the morning sun shone through the window, the king woke up and felt Hailey's weight on him. His eyes widened in panic, and he gently turned her over. The girl's face, including her hair and nightgown, were all stained with dark red blood. Roderick immediately started shouting for the guards to bring the royal physician to the room. The doctor declared that Her Majesty the Queen was fine, but her symptoms were beyond worldly understanding. The heroine made a hoarse sound, and the king rushed to the bedside. The girl asked in a soft, confused voice, "Why are there so many people in the room?" She had spent the whole night using the amulet to exorcise half of the evil spirits and then passed out. When Hailey noticed the king was bleeding, she panicked. The man gently took her hand and explained explained that it was actually her who had been bleeding. He desperately pleaded with her to tell him what had happened. Roderick trembled all over because he saw his close friend bleeding profusely beside him. Moreover, Hailey always said things he couldn't understand. She hesitantly asked him to leave and go back to her room, worried that her words would ruin the king's mood. Roderick agreed, but insisted on carrying her there himself. On the way, while he was carrying her, the heroine lost consciousness again. Now, only the two of them were left in the room. Roderick leaned down and demanded she tell him the truth, where exactly she was hurt and why this was happening. If he knew the truth, perhaps he could at least protect her. But Hailey didn't want to say. She had gone to great lengths to give this man a few peaceful nights. The king realized that it was indeed difficult to expose one's own weaknesses. But if the girl did so, he could protect her and fight alongside her. The protagonist bit her lip, not understanding how long he intended to insist like this. She hated that she couldn't just say it, feeling sad and disgusted with herself. So Hailey pushed the king away and questioned why on earth he would fight for her. She was a strange person, completely different, and Roderick knew this, but he was still trying to get to the bottom of her. Her hoarse voice turned into a shout, and she begged him not to even try to understand her, because it would be easier for her that way. Hailey knew that if the king also looked at her that way, she wouldn't be able to bear it. She had already learned how to breathe, just so she wouldn't die from the pain. From where she stood now, she wanted him to let her do something. The man grabbed her hand and softly asked how he could possibly do that. Hailey didn't even realize the expression on her face as she tried to push him away. He pleaded with her not to say such things. About herself, she was still his wife. Roderick desperately promised that he would do anything to protect her, if only she would tell him the truth.